storm was loud enough to bury most sounds in Riverton that night, but Caleb Henderson still heard the motorcycle before it reached his shop.
The engine is screaming for help.
He heard the engine screaming through the rain, fighting for one more mile through Riverton's empty industrial streets.
Come on, just one more mile.
A violent metallic knock cut through the wind.
Not now!
And turned Malik's last mile into a fight for control. The bike slid into the flooded lot outside Henderson Motor Works, dragged sideways by rain, failing metal, and fading control. The rider fell hard near the old garage door, soaked to the bone and clutching his shoulder beside the ruined Harley.
Sir, can you make it run long enough to get me home?
Before Caleb understood why Malik was riding through the storm, he learned Malik had promised his daughter he would be at her graduation by morning.
My daughter is waiting for me.
Malik had no money, no backup plan, and no time left to lose. All he had was a father's promise waiting at the end of the road. Caleb opened the ruined Harley with the careful hands of a man who had spent his life listening to machines. Caleb listened to the broken engine for only a few seconds and felt 18 years of buried pain rise inside him.
I know that sound.
The failure was not ordinary wear. It carried the same deliberate pattern Caleb had feared for 18 years.
I've seen this before.
The sound inside Malik's Harley had already destroyed Caleb's life once, long before this storm brought it back to his door.
What did this bike do to you?
Because that sound had already destroyed his life once. For several seconds, neither man spoke as rain tapped steadily against the garage roof.
Don't touch a thing.
For several seconds, neither man spoke. Malik stood near the workbench, staring at the old title papers, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something easier to understand. Caleb remained beside the exposed engine, one hand resting against the cold metal of the Road King. The storm had begun to move beyond Riverton by then, but rain still tapped steadily against the roof, slipping through a crack near the back wall and falling into an empty oil pan with a slow, hollow rhythm. Malik had spent most of his adult life around motorcycles. He knew enough to recognize when a mechanic was concerned and when a mechanic was simply trying to sound important. But what he saw on Caleb's face was neither. It was grief mixed with recognition, the look of a man who had just found a piece of his own past hidden inside a stranger's machine. He asked Caleb what the name on the paperwork meant. The old mechanic did not answer immediately. He picked up the damaged cam component again and turned it beneath the fluorescent light. Its edges were worn down, but the seal was still there. Small, faint, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Then Caleb told Malik that the rider listed on those documents had died in the accident that ruined him. Not the man who bought the bike years later. Not the rider who had owned it before Malik. The original rider. The man whose crash had been used to blame Caleb for a failure he had tried to prevent. Malik looked back at the Road King. Suddenly, the motorcycle no longer seemed like an unlucky purchase from a liquidation yard. It looked like evidence that had somehow survived 18 years of lies. Caleb explained that the official report had claimed the motorcycle had been destroyed after the crash. That detail had always bothered him, though he had never been able to prove why. The bike had been taken away before he could inspect it. The police had refused to let him near the evidence. Victor's lawyers had moved quickly, and every question Caleb asked had been treated as the bitter complaint of a man trying to escape responsibility. By the time Caleb understood how completely he had been trapped, the machine was gone. Or so he had believed. Malik asked the question that had been hanging in the garage since the moment Caleb saw the title. If the bike was supposed to be destroyed, how had it ended up in his hands? Caleb had no answer, but he knew one thing with certainty. Machines did not disappear on their own. Someone had moved that Harley. Someone had rebuilt it. Someone had removed parts, replaced evidence, erased records, and then sent it back into the world under a different history. And if the same kind of damaged component had caused the previous owner's highway crash, then Victor Hale's secret had not ended 18 years earlier. It had continued. That realization changed the repair. Until then, Caleb had been trying to save Malik's ride so a father could keep a promise to his daughter. But now every part that came off the engine mattered for another reason. The damaged chain, the worn guide, the altered tensioner, the hidden Hale seal. None of it could be thrown away. Caleb laid each piece on a clean cloth, carefully separating them from the normal debris of the repair. He took photographs with an old digital camera from a drawer beneath the counter. The camera was outdated, its screen scratched, but it still worked. He photographed the seals, the manufacturing numbers, the strange cuts in the metal, and the repair marks that had been hidden under layers of grease. Malik watched quietly for a while. Then he asked whether this could get Caleb into trouble. The old mechanic gave a tired half-smile. Trouble, he said, had been living with him for 18 years. He just had not known its name. That was the first time Malik saw something change in Caleb. Before that night, the older man had carried himself like someone trying not to take up space in the world. He moved carefully. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact too long. But now, while studying the engine, Caleb's hands became steadier. His back straightened. The old instinct returned to him, the instinct of a mechanic who trusted what he knew, even when nobody else believed him. He began explaining the failure in a way Malik could understand. The chain tensioner had not simply worn down. It had been weakened by design. The materials were cheap, but the failure pattern was too consistent to be accidental. The part had been made to look almost identical to a reliable one, yet it lacked the strength required for long-distance riding. It would survive just long enough to pass inspection. It would survive long enough for a customer to drive away feeling satisfied. Then, under heat and pressure, it would begin to fail. A rider might hear a faint metallic tapping first, then a vibration. Then, if they ignored it or could not reach help in time, the engine could lock. Caleb's voice became quieter as he described the last part. An engine lock at highway speed could turn a motorcycle into a weapon against the person riding it. Malik looked down at the wet leather gloves in his hands. He had been less than an hour from that kind of disaster when he reached Henderson Motor Works. For the first time, he understood that Caleb had not just repaired his bike. The old man may have saved his life. But Caleb did not want gratitude. He seemed almost uncomfortable when Malik tried to thank him. Instead, he returned to the engine and kept working. Every few minutes, he would pause, listen, adjust something, and continue. There was no rush in his movements, yet there was urgency in everything he did. The clock above the office door passed 2 in the morning, then 3. By 4, the rain had weakened into a mist, and the distant thunder had faded beyond the warehouses at the edge of town. The city outside had gone quiet. Only the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement passed through the darkness. Inside the garage, Caleb installed the camshaft he had kept hidden for so many years. He did not make a ceremony of it. He did not tell Malik how much it had cost him to use it. He simply cleaned the part one final time, fitted it into place, and tightened each bolt with the kind of attention that comes from experience and regret. But Malik understood. He had seen the way Caleb held that camshaft before putting it into the engine. It was not like a mechanic holding a spare part. It was like a father holding the last object connected to a life he had failed to protect. Malik offered to pay for it. Caleb refused. Malik offered to sell the Road King once he reached Fairmont, to send the money back, to do whatever it took. Again, Caleb refused. Then, after a long silence, the old man told him something that did not sound like an order. It sounded more like a request from someone who had spent too many years alone. He asked Malik to come back after the graduation. No matter what happened, no matter how tired he was, no matter whether the day went well or badly. Just come back. Malik nodded. He had no idea why that promise mattered so much, but he knew it did. And after hearing what Caleb had lost, he could not bring himself to take the request lightly. A little before dawn, the Road King came back to life. The engine did not roar wildly. It settled into a deep, steady rhythm, low and strong, like a heartbeat returning after a long illness. Caleb listened with his head slightly tilted, eyes closed, letting the sound fill the garage. For a moment, Malik thought the old mechanic might cry, but Caleb only opened his eyes and gave a single nod. The bike was ready. Malik stood beside it in the gray light of early morning, looking down at the man who had worked through a storm for someone he had never met. He wanted to say something meaningful, something big enough to match what had been done for him. But there are moments when words feel too small. So he simply told Caleb that he would not forget. Caleb looked toward the old framed photograph in the office. Then he looked back at Malik. He told him that forgetting was easy. Keeping a promise was harder. Malik rode out of Riverton as the first thin line of sunlight touched the clouds. The streets were still wet. The warehouses were still dark. But the Road King moved smoothly beneath him, carrying him toward Fairmont, toward his daughter, toward the promise he had nearly lost. Caleb remained at the garage door long after the sound of the motorcycle disappeared. Then he turned back inside. The broken parts were still laid out on the cloth. The old title papers were still open on the workbench. The Hale seal sat beneath the yellow light like a small wound that had finally started bleeding again. Caleb picked up the burned spark plug he had kept from Isaiah's accident. For 18 years, he had treated it like proof of his failure. He had hidden it in a drawer, taken it out only when grief became too heavy, then put it away again before morning. But that day, he did not return it to the drawer. He placed it beside the damaged component from Malik's motorcycle. Old evidence beside new evidence. A dead son beside a living truth. By 8 o'clock, Riverton was awake. And by 9, Victor Hale was standing outside Henderson Motor Works with 2 investors, a polished black SUV, and the kind of smile that had fooled people for most of his life. Victor had aged well on the surface. His hair was silver now, but styled carefully. His jacket looked expensive. His watch caught the morning light. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world had already decided he was important. Behind him, across the street, banners were being hung on a vacant lot. The banners displayed the logo of Hale Performance Customs and announced the opening of a new luxury performance center. It was bigger than Victor's original garage had ever been. Glass walls, chrome signage, a showroom for wealthy riders who wanted their machines to look dangerous without ever having to understand what was inside them. Caleb watched from the doorway as Victor approached. The investors stayed a few steps behind, pretending to admire the old shop while clearly seeing it as nothing more than a piece of land in the way. Victor greeted Caleb with the practiced warmth of a man who enjoyed being cruel only when no one could prove it. He spoke about progress, about opportunity, about how Riverton was changing. Then he handed Caleb a folder containing the final notice from the bank. 7 days. That was all Caleb had left before the property would be transferred. Victor acted as though he was doing him a favor by delivering the news personally. He suggested that perhaps it was time for Caleb to stop fighting old ghosts. He suggested that a man his age deserved peace. Caleb did not react. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked back to the workbench and picked up the damaged component from Malik's bike. Then he placed it on the counter between them. Victor's expression changed, only for a second. But Caleb saw it. The smile remained, yet something behind it slipped. His eyes moved to the Hale seal stamped into the metal. His fingers tightened around the folder. The smooth confidence in his face became strained, like a thin layer of paint cracking over rust. Victor recovered quickly. He said the seal meant nothing. He claimed parts changed hands all the time. He suggested Caleb was seeing conspiracies because he could not accept the past. But when Victor turned to leave, Caleb noticed something else. His hand was trembling. Not much, just enough. And for the first time in 18 years, Caleb Henderson understood that Victor Hale was afraid. Victor Hale left Henderson Motor Works with the same polished smile he had arrived with, but Caleb knew that smile had changed. It no longer belonged to a man who felt untouchable. It belonged to a man who had just seen a ghost rise from the floorboards of his own past. For the rest of that day, Caleb did not open the shop to customers. He locked the front door, pulled down the faded blinds, and spread every piece of evidence across the workbench. Malik's damaged parts sat beside the burned spark plug from Isaiah's accident. The title papers remained open near Caleb's camera. The old evidence seemed almost impossible to connect at first. One motorcycle from 18 years ago, one bike that should have been destroyed, one seal hidden inside a part no ordinary rider would ever inspect. But Caleb had spent his life listening to engines. He knew that machines told the truth slowly. They did not care who owned the building, who signed the checks, or who had the better lawyer. Metal remembered pressure. Bearings remembered heat. Chains remembered strain. And when something failed by design, the evidence often stayed buried inside the damage. By noon, Caleb had photographed every detail twice. He wrote down serial numbers. He matched worn patterns. He checked the old manuals he had kept in a cabinet near the back wall. Then he found something he had not expected. the part inside Malik's road. King carried a batch number that had been discontinued years earlier. It was from the same supplier Victor had used before the old accident. The same supplier Caleb had warned him about. The same supplier Victor had once claimed had never existed. For nearly 2 hours, Caleb sat alone in the office, staring at that number. He could still hear Isaiah's voice in his mind, not the voice from the night he died. Caleb had tried for years not to remember that night. What stayed with him was an earlier memory. Isaiah standing beside him at the old shop, grease on his hands, laughing at the way his father could recognize a bad engine by sound alone. Isaiah had once told him that engines were honest because they could not lie about pain. If something was wrong inside them, they would always make a noise eventually. Caleb had not understood then how much those words would haunt him. Now they felt like a warning. By late afternoon, Malik called. He had made it to Fairmont. For a moment, Caleb did not answer. He stared at the phone, still unsure whether the call would bring relief or more trouble. Then he picked up. Malik's voice was tired, but it carried something Caleb had not heard in years. Joy. He had arrived just before the ceremony began. He had walked into the school auditorium with rain still drying on his jacket and road dust on his boots. His daughter had been seated among the graduates, wearing the dress he had carried through the storm. When she saw him, she did not run to him. She did not make a scene. She simply looked over the crowd, found him standing near the back wall, and smiled in a way that made every mile worth it. Malik told Caleb that he had never felt so ashamed of how close he came to breaking that promise. Then he told him that his daughter had hugged him afterward and said she knew he would come. That was all Caleb needed to hear. For the first time in 18 years, he felt that maybe one promise had been saved from the same fate as all the others. But Malik had not forgotten what happened at the shop. He had spent part of the afternoon searching through the paperwork for his Road King. The more he looked, the stranger it became. The title history had gaps. The previous owner had purchased the bike through a dealer that no longer existed. The dealer's address turned out to belong to a storage company connected to Hale Performance Customs, and the insurance report from the old owner's death mentioned a mechanical failure but did not list the exact cause. That detail bothered Malik. He called one of the men from Road Saints MC, an older biker named Curtis Bell. Curtis had spent more than 20 years as a state traffic investigator before retirement. He knew how evidence disappeared when powerful people wanted it gone. He also knew how often old files were marked closed long before the truth was fully understood. Malik told him everything. At first, Curtis was cautious. He had seen too many people mistake grief for proof. But when Malik mentioned the Hale seal and the batch number, Curtis became quiet. Then he told Malik that he had heard rumors years ago about Hale Performance Customs. Rumors of cheap parts, suspicious accidents, customers pressured into silence, and repair records that never quite matched the machines on the road. Nothing had ever been proven. Not because there was no truth, because no one had managed to hold enough of it at once. Malik told Curtis he had found a man who might have been carrying part of that truth for 18 years. 3 days later, Malik returned to Riverton. He did not come alone. By then, Caleb had almost convinced himself that Malik would not return. He had spent the days preparing for the bank's deadline, sorting tools into boxes, deciding which machines he could sell, which photographs he could not bear to throw away, and which memories he would have to leave behind if Henderson Motor Works closed forever. He had also started to notice cars slowing near the shop. A black sedan passed twice one afternoon. A dark pickup sat across the street for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. No threats, no broken windows, no warning left on the door. But Caleb understood the message. Victor was watching. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sound of motorcycles rolled down the street. Not one bike, several. The sound was deep and steady, echoing through Riverton's old warehouse district. Caleb stepped outside and saw Malik leading a line of riders into the parking lot. Behind him were members of Road Saints MC, all of them dressed in worn leather and rain-faded denim. They did not arrive like men looking for trouble. They arrived like people who had already decided that someone had been left alone for too long. Curtis Bell was among them. He was tall, gray-haired, and walked with the stiff posture of a man whose old injuries had never fully healed. Beside him stood another biker Caleb recognized after a long moment. The man's name was Raymond Knox, a retired Harley mechanic who had once worked at a supplier near Hale's original garage. Raymond looked older than Caleb remembered. His face had deep lines, and his hands shook slightly as he removed his gloves. But his eyes were clear. He told Caleb he had been at Hale Performance Customs on the night of the accident. Caleb did not speak. Raymond explained that he had delivered a crate of parts that evening. He had seen Victor argue with Caleb near the service bay. He had heard Caleb warn him that the cam system was dangerous. He had heard Victor say the bike was leaving that night, no matter what Caleb thought. Then, after the crash, Raymond saw Victor pull paperwork from an office drawer before the police arrived. He watched him hand documents to a lawyer. He watched him tell everyone that Caleb had approved the work. Raymond had wanted to say something then, but Victor had threatened him. Not openly. Not in a way that could be reported. Victor had simply made it clear that Raymond's job, his reputation, and his family's security could disappear if he caused trouble. Raymond had been younger then. His wife was sick. His son had just started college. He convinced himself that someone else would speak up. No one did. For 18 years, he had carried that cowardice. When Malik told him about Caleb repairing the Road King through the storm, using his own last valuable part to help a stranger keep a promise to his daughter, Raymond said something inside him changed. He realized Caleb had spent 18 years paying for a sin that belonged to another man. And Raymond had spent 18 years helping that lie survive. Curtis placed a thick folder on Caleb's workbench. Inside were copies of old reports, insurance records, auction documents, and storage transfers. It took hours to piece together the full story, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. The motorcycle from the original accident had not been destroyed. It had been moved from the evidence yard under a false disposal order. A shell company had purchased it. The shell company was linked through a chain of ownership to Hale Performance Customs. The bike was rebuilt using replacement parts, then sold through another intermediary to avoid attention. Years later, it reappeared in the hands of the man whose name Malik had found on the title. That man died in a highway accident after his engine locked. The Road King was later sold again through an estate liquidation. And eventually, by chance or fate, it made its way to Malik. The machine had carried the same secret through several owners, leaving wreckage behind it like a trail no one had bothered to follow. Caleb sat down slowly. He had spent years believing the past was over because everyone else had moved on. But the truth was worse. Victor had not simply destroyed Caleb's life and walked away. He had taken the same dangerous system, the same dishonest parts, the same method of hiding evidence, and turned it into a business model. The old accident was not one tragedy. It was the first warning. Curtis told Caleb they needed independent engineers. They needed the damaged parts examined by people with no connection to Hale. They needed the old case reopened. They needed journalists willing to listen. And they needed to move before Victor had time to erase anything else. Caleb listened, but fear still lived inside him. He had been here before. He had brought concerns to people in authority. He had trusted that facts would matter. He had watched Victor walk away while his own name was dragged through the mud. Malik understood that fear, so he did not pressure Caleb. He simply told him that some men spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to become brave, only to learn that bravery usually begins when someone else is already in danger. That sentence stayed with Caleb. The next morning, Victor Hale announced the grand opening of his newest performance center. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, directly across from Henderson Motor Works. The timing was not accidental. Victor wanted cameras, investors, local officials, and reporters to see his polished new showroom, while Caleb's fading garage stood behind it like a symbol of failure. He wanted Riverton to believe that the future belonged to him, and that men like Caleb were nothing more than rusted pieces of the past. The invitation described Hale Performance Customs as a company built on safety, craftsmanship, and loyalty. When Caleb read those words, he almost laughed. Instead, he folded the paper and placed it beside Isaiah's burned spark plug. By Saturday, the street outside Henderson Motor Works looked nothing like it had during the storm. The skies were clear. The sidewalks had been washed clean. White tents stood outside Victor's new building. Caterers moved between tables. Large banners carried the Hale logo. Investors in tailored jackets gathered near the entrance, speaking about growth, property values, and expansion. Victor stood near the stage in front of the showroom doors, smiling for photographs. For years, he had mastered the art of looking like a man who had earned everything. Across the street, Caleb's old sign hung crooked above the garage. Henderson Motor Works. The letters were faded. The roof still leaked. The windows still needed paint. But that morning, the shop was not empty. Inside, Curtis reviewed the evidence one final time. Raymond sat near the office door, pale but determined. Malik stood beside the Road King, now fully repaired. His daughter's graduation flower still tucked into a side compartment. Several members of Road Saints MC waited outside, engines quiet, helmets in hand. Caleb stood near the workbench. In front of him was a small metal box. Inside were the damaged Hale parts, the old spark plug, photographs, records, and copies of every document that could prove what Victor had done. His hands were trembling, not because he doubted the evidence, because he knew that once he stepped outside, there would be no going back. For 18 years, Victor Hale had controlled the story. He had told Riverton who Caleb was. He had told the police what happened. He had told the newspapers who was responsible. And Caleb had lived inside that lie because he had no power to break it. But now, standing in the quiet shop with Malik, Curtis, Raymond, and the Road Saints behind him, Caleb realized something he had forgotten. Truth did not need to be loud to be strong. It only needed enough people willing to stop looking away. At noon, Victor stepped onto the stage. He began with the same speech he had given at other openings. He spoke about American craftsmanship. He praised the spirit of the open road. He thanked the investors who believed in his vision. He spoke about trust, safety, and the brotherhood of riders. Then the sound of motorcycles filled the street. One by one, the Road Saints rode into view. More than 30 Harleys moved down the block in a slow line, their engines low and controlled. They did not rev aggressively. They did not block traffic recklessly. They did not shout. They simply arrived. The crowd turned. Victor's smile stiffened. Malik led the group on the blue-black Road King that Caleb had repaired in the storm. He parked directly across from the stage. Behind him, the other riders formed a straight row along the curb. Then Caleb stepped out of Henderson Motor Works. He wore the same faded work shirt he had worn for years. His hands were still stained with oil. His shoulders were slightly bent with age. But he did not look small. He carried the metal box under one arm. Curtis walked beside him holding the records. Raymond followed behind, moving slowly but refusing to stop. The local reporter who had come to cover Victor's opening recognized Caleb almost immediately. She remembered the old accident. She remembered the headlines from 18 years ago. She also remembered that Caleb had disappeared from public life after Isaiah died. When she asked what was happening, Curtis handed her a copy of the evidence summary. The mood changed quickly. Victor tried to interrupt. He told everyone that Caleb was confused. He suggested that the old mechanic was bitter and unstable. He said the Road Saints were trying to sabotage a legitimate business. But his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Too many people were watching. And this time, Caleb was not alone. Curtis explained the chain of evidence, the false disposal order, the shell company, the rebuilt motorcycle, the repeat failure pattern, the supplier records, the mismatched parts, the mechanics analysis, the old accident report that never mentioned the batch number. Raymond then spoke. His voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every sentence. He told the crowd that Caleb had warned Victor. He confirmed that Victor had pushed the unsafe bike out of the shop. He described the paperwork being changed before investigators arrived. He admitted that he had stayed silent because he was afraid. He said he had been ashamed of that silence every day since. The crowd did not move. Victor looked toward the investors, hoping they would dismiss it all as drama. But they had stopped smiling. One of them was already on the phone. Another stared at the Hale banner above the showroom entrance as if it had become something ugly. Then Caleb opened the metal box. He removed the burned spark plug. For a moment, the entire street seemed to grow quieter. Caleb told them it came from the motorcycle involved in the crash 18 years earlier. He explained that he had kept it because he believed it represented his failure. But after studying Malik's Road King, he understood that the machine had been failing long before Isaiah died. He held up the damaged Hale component. Then he looked directly at Victor. Caleb did not scream. He did not curse. He did not beg anyone to believe him. He simply told Victor that he had taken his name, his work, and his son. But he had never understood the machines he sold. That was the moment Victor finally lost control. He accused Caleb of lying. He called Raymond a coward and Curtis a washed-up investigator. He claimed Malik had planted evidence. He insisted that the old accident had been closed for years and that no one could reopen it. But panic made him careless. The reporter asked why he knew the old case had been listed as destroyed if he had never seen the disposal order. Victor froze. It was only a brief pause, but it was enough. Curtis had already contacted the State Fraud Division. The reporter had already sent copies of the documents to her editor. Independent engineers had reviewed Caleb's photographs and confirmed that the part failures were consistent with deliberate use of substandard materials. Within an hour, law enforcement officers arrived. They did not arrest Victor immediately in front of everyone. First, they secured the damaged motorcycle parts. They collected the records. They questioned Raymond. They requested access to Hale Performance Customs files, supplier contracts, repair logs, and storage records. But Victor understood what was happening. The story he had buried for 18 years was no longer buried. By evening, the grand opening had been canceled. The investors withdrew. The showroom doors remained closed. And the Hale banners, once meant to celebrate Victor's success, hung over an empty parking lot like reminders of a lie too large to hide. The investigation lasted months. During that time, more writers came forward. A widow from another county brought records from her husband's crash. A former employee described being told to replace expensive parts with cheaper ones. A supplier admitted that Hale had purchased batches of components that failed safety standards, but cost almost half as much. The evidence grew. So did the truth. Victor Hale was eventually charged with fraud, evidence tampering, falsifying repair records, and reckless endangerment connected to multiple motorcycle failures. Civil lawsuits followed. His business collapsed. The same reputation he had built by stealing Caleb's work became the thing that destroyed him. And the most painful part for Victor was that he could not blame anyone else. Every false signature, every altered record, every unsafe part, every rider placed at risk. All of it led back to him. Meanwhile, Riverton began to see Caleb differently. At first, people came to Henderson Motor Works out of curiosity. They wanted to see the mechanic from the news. They wanted to ask questions about the old case. Some came with apologies they should have offered years earlier. Caleb accepted some. Others he could not. Forgiveness, he learned, was not the same as pretending nothing happened. What mattered most was that Isaiah's name was cleared. The revised investigation confirmed that Isaiah had not caused the tragedy. He had tried to save others when the fire broke out. The city recognized him for his courage. A small memorial was placed near the site of the old accident, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that he had been brave when others were afraid. Caleb attended the dedication quietly. He did not give a speech. He stood beneath Isaiah's name and placed the burned spark plug at the base of the memorial for a few seconds before taking it back. This time, he did not see it as evidence of failure. He saw it as the beginning of the truth. Road Saints, MC, started a fundraiser to help Caleb keep his shop. He resisted at first. He did not want charity. He had spent too long believing that accepting help meant admitting weakness. But Malik reminded him that loyalty was not charity. Loyalty meant showing up when someone had spent years showing up for others. The money was enough to pay the bank, repair the roof, replace the failing electrical system, and repaint the front of Henderson Motor Works. Caleb refused to turn the place into something fancy. He did not want glass walls or polished chrome floors. He wanted the shop to remain what it had always been, a place where honest work mattered more than appearances. A few weeks later, a new sign went up above the garage. Henderson Motor Works, built with truth, kept alive by loyalty. Malik came by every weekend after that. Sometimes he needed a repair. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes he simply sat on an old stool near the workbench while Caleb worked and talked about his daughter's new plans after graduation. She visited once too. She brought Caleb a framed photograph from the ceremony. In it, Malik stood in the back of the auditorium, soaked jacket, tired eyes, and a smile so wide it looked almost painful. She told Caleb that her father had made a promise and kept it. Caleb looked at the picture for a long time. Then he told her that promises were not always about being perfect. Sometimes they were about refusing to stop trying, even when the road was dark, the weather was cruel, and every reason to turn back was waiting behind you. Years earlier, Caleb had lost his son because he believed work had to come before everything else. That night in the storm, he chose differently. He chose to save a stranger's promise. And in doing so, he found the truth that finally brought his own son home. Because sometimes, the person who arrives at your door needing help is not there by accident. Sometimes they carry the missing piece of a story you thought was over. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the force that pulls years of darkness into the light. And sometimes, justice does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the sound of an old engine finally running the way it was always meant to run. If you believe that truth may take time, but it never stops searching for a way back, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The judge was about to close the hearing when a 10-year-old boy stood up and asked to question the witness.
Please, just one question.
District Attorney Roland Vance rose immediately, furious that a child was being allowed anywhere near the case.
Grief does not make a child an expert.
Caleb, you do not have to carry this.
I already told them what I remembered.
Judge Helena Cross had seen families cry before, but the boy did not look ready to perform. He looked terrified.
One question, nothing more.
Please let them hear him this time.
Caleb had to stand on a wooden step just to reach the microphone adults had ignored for 2 years.
You all trusted the time, but no one checked it.
Vance called the conviction airtight, but the child's calmness revealed the first crack in his confidence.
Choose your words carefully, boy.
Hidden inside a photograph everyone had already seen was a mistake that had stolen 2 years from an innocent man. Silas watched his son prepare to ask the question every trained adult had failed to ask.
The truth is still here.
That sign, I only turned it after closing.
Then Caleb asked the one question no one else had thought to ask.
What time did your store close on Sunday nights?
Long before Caleb Turner stood in that courtroom, before reporters knew his name, and before one simple question threatened to tear apart a prosecutor's perfect conviction, he knew his father as the man who could make forgotten clocks speak again. Silas Turner owned a narrow repair shop on the oldest street in Briar Creek. The sign above the door read, "Turner Clockworks," though time and rain had faded some of the gold lettering. Inside, the walls were crowded with mantel clocks, pocket watches, brass carriage clocks, wooden regulators, and tall grandfather clocks whose pendulums moved with the patience of men who had seen generations come and go. The shop never sounded completely quiet. Even after closing, even when Silas turned off the lights and locked the front door, dozens of clocks continued ticking in different rhythms. Some ran fast, some ran slow. Some chimed several seconds apart, filling the darkness with imperfect music. Caleb loved that sound. While other children spent their afternoons watching cartoons or throwing balls in the street, Caleb sat on a tall stool beside his father's workbench. His feet did not reach the floor, so they swung beneath him while he watched Silas work beneath the yellow light of a desk lamp. Silas handled every clock as if it were alive. He never forced a rusted gear. He never twisted a hand that resisted. He listened first. He watched. He removed each screw carefully, placed every tiny part on dark velvet, and searched for the smallest sign of damage. To most people, a broken clock was only an object that no longer worked. To Silas, it was a witness. A worn tooth on a gear meant the movement had been carrying too much strain. A bent minute hand meant someone had tried to reset it too roughly. A faint scratch inside the case could reveal that an earlier repairman had installed the wrong part. Nothing stopped without a reason, Silas often told Caleb. Every failure left a trace. Caleb remembered one afternoon when an elderly woman brought in a pocket watch wrapped in a white handkerchief. It had belonged to her husband and had not ticked since the morning he died. She could not afford a proper restoration, but she asked Silas whether he could make it run just once more. Silas worked on that watch for 3 evenings. When the woman returned, he placed it gently in her palm. The watch began ticking, soft but steady, and the woman closed her fingers around it as tears filled her eyes. She tried to pay, but Silas refused. He told her some repairs were worth more than money. Ruth Turner loved her husband for moments like that, though she also worried about them. Kindness did not pay the rent. Sentiment did not buy groceries. Their life was always balanced between enough and almost enough. Ruth worked mornings, cleaning rooms at a motel near the highway, and covered evening shifts at a laundromat when bills grew too heavy. Silas repaired clocks, watches, music boxes, and occasionally old mechanical toys. Caleb did his homework at the front counter and ate dinner from paper containers when Ruth worked late. They were not wealthy, but their home had warmth. Silas laughed easily. Ruth sang while cooking. Caleb fell asleep most nights, hearing the faint ticking of the small brass travel clock his father kept beside the kitchen window. Silas had one lesson he repeated more than any other. When time is wrong, everything built on it becomes wrong too. At first, Caleb thought his father was only talking about clocks. A minute hand, placed incorrectly, could cause the chime to strike at the wrong hour. One gear installed out of position could throw the entire mechanism out of rhythm. A small mistake hidden inside the case could make every movement afterward incorrect. Caleb had no idea that those words would one day become the key to his father's freedom. The day everything changed was Sunday, March 10th. It was the first morning after daylight saving time began, the yearly adjustment that pushed clocks forward by 1 hour. Silas disliked it. He spent half the morning walking through the shop, resetting every clock one by one, while Caleb followed him with a notebook. Ruth teased him for treating the time change like a national emergency. Silas replied that people should not move time around carelessly, and then act surprised when the world became confused. Caleb laughed. By midnight, none of them would find the joke funny. Marlowe's Corner, Market sat beside County Road 17, a small convenience store with 2 aging gas pumps, a flickering soda sign, and a bell above the entrance that rang half a second after the door opened. Owen Marlowe had owned the store for more than 30 years. After his wife died, the market became more than a business. It gave him somewhere to go each morning, and a reason to keep speaking to people. Behind the register hung a red rooster wall clock. The paint was chipped, one wooden wing was cracked, and the pale face had yellowed with age. Owen's wife had bought it during the first year of their marriage. Even after she died, Owen could not bring himself to remove it. 2 weeks before the robbery, that clock had stopped. Owen considered throwing it away, but Silas offered to repair it. He cleaned the movement, replaced a worn spring, realigned the hands, and stayed long enough to make sure it kept accurate time. When Owen asked what he owed, Silas charged him only for the replacement part. The red rooster clock began ticking again behind the register. No one understood then that it would become the most important witness in Briar Creek. On the night of March 10th, a man entered Marlowe's Corner Market wearing a dark coat and a cap pulled low over his face. The security camera was old and mounted near the ceiling, creating a grainy image that hid more than it revealed. The man appeared tall. His shoulders were broad. His walk looked slightly uneven. He threatened Owen, forced him to open the register, took the cash bag, and left through the front entrance. The security footage displayed a timestamp of 8:18 p.m. Owen called 911 in a frightened, breathless voice. The emergency dispatch system recorded his call at 9:22 p.m. That 1 hour difference should have stopped the investigation before it began. Someone should have asked why a terrified store owner, who claimed to call immediately after the robber left, had waited more than an hour. No one did. The camera said 8:18, and the number appeared clean, mechanical, and official. It seemed easier to trust than memory. Less than 4 hours later, deputies arrived at the Turner home. The pounding on the door woke Caleb. He came into the hallway barefoot, wearing an oversized sleep shirt, and saw Ruth speaking to 2 officers beneath the porch light. Silas stood behind her. He had returned from work not long before and still smelled faintly of brass polish and machine oil. The deputies asked where he had been that evening. Silas explained that he had repaired the large wall clock inside St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. After finishing, he drove to a supplier's storage facility to collect a spring for an anniversary clock. His electronic access card had been scanned at the storage building at 9:07 p.m. The facility was more than 13 miles from Marlowe's Corner Market. Silas believed that record would protect him. But according to the camera, the robbery had happened at 8:18. The investigators assumed Silas could have robbed the store and then driven to the storage facility afterward. The deputies had already seen the footage. The robber was a tall black man with broad shoulders and an uneven step. Silas had injured his right knee years earlier while carrying a grandfather clock down a staircase. He sometimes limped when tired. He owned a dark coat. He had visited Owen's store 2 weeks before and knew where the camera and register were located. None of those details proved he was the robber. Together, they created a story the deputies were ready to believe. Caleb watched one officer place handcuffs around his father's wrists. The memory never left him. The wet shine of the pavement. Ruth repeating Silas's name. A neighbor's curtain moving across the street. The clocks inside their home ticking while the world outside stopped making sense. Silas turned toward Caleb before the patrol car door closed. He did not promise everything would be fine. Silas respected the truth too much to offer comfort he could not guarantee. He only told Caleb to take care of his mother. By morning, Briar Creek had already judged him. News traveled quickly through the town. A poor black clockmaker had robbed an elderly white shopkeeper. The camera had recorded the crime. Silas had known the store's layout. His business had been struggling. For people who wanted a simple answer, the story fit too easily. Customers stopped entering Turner Clockworks. Some claimed they wanted to wait until the facts were clear, though they had already decided which facts mattered. Others crossed the road rather than pass the shop. Someone wrote the word "thief" across the front window in black marker. Ruth tried to remove it before Caleb arrived from school, but the stain remained visible beneath the glass. At school, children repeated the words they heard at home. They asked Caleb whether his father had robbed other stores. One boy placed a plastic toy clock on Caleb's desk and joked that perhaps Silas could steal another hour from it. The teacher heard him. She looked away. That was the first time Caleb understood that silence could become permission. District Attorney Roland Vance took control of the case almost immediately. Vance was preparing to run for a state judgeship. He had built his reputation on swift convictions, polished speeches, and promises to protect honest families from crime. He appeared at church breakfasts, charity events, and press conferences. He knew exactly where to stand when cameras arrived and exactly how long to pause before saying the word justice. The Turner case was perfect for him. An elderly victim, a security video, a struggling defendant, a timeline simple enough for television. Vance told reporters the evidence was strong. He praised the deputies for acting quickly. He described Silas as someone who had used the trust of a local business owner to learn the store's vulnerabilities. Before the trial began, Vance had already turned the case into part of his political story. Silas received a court-appointed attorney named Brian Kell. Kell was not cruel. He was exhausted. His desk carried more files than any one lawyer could read carefully. He moved from hearing to hearing, bargaining cases, filling forms, and telling himself that doing something for each client was better than doing nothing. Silas explained the access card record from 907. He explained the repair at St. Bartholomew's. He explained that Owen claimed to have called 911 immediately, yet the emergency log showed 922. Kell wrote a few notes and promised to investigate. But he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He trusted the timestamp. At trial, Roland Vance repeated the time 8:18 until it became the heartbeat of the prosecution's case. At 8:18, the robber entered the store. At 8:18, Owen Marlowe feared for his life. At 8:18, Silas Turner had no verified alibi. The access card scan at 9:07 seemed irrelevant if the robbery occurred almost 50 minutes earlier. Vance suggested Silas had committed the crime, changed his route, and then appeared at the storage building to create distance from the scene. The 911 call at 9:22 was treated as evidence of Owen's trauma. Vance told the jury that a terrified elderly man could not be expected to remember every minute after being threatened. Perhaps Owen had locked the doors. Perhaps he had sat in shock. Perhaps fear had distorted his sense of time. Vance transformed the contradiction into sympathy. Then he delivered the sentence that stayed in Caleb's mind for years. The camera had no reason to lie. It sounded powerful. Mechanical evidence seemed pure. A camera had no prejudice, no fear, no political ambition, and no desire to protect one man or accuse another. But no one asked whether the camera knew the correct time. Brian Kell did not call a security system expert. He did not inspect the recorder's settings. He did not enlarge the background of the footage. He did not ask about the daylight saving time change. He did not ask why the closed sign appeared turned toward the street. He did not ask why a mop bucket was visible near the counter, or why Owen's bank deposit bag had already been placed beside the register. Most importantly, he did not ask about the red rooster clock. Caleb sat behind his mother throughout the trial. He was 8 years old and did not understand every legal term, but he understood tone. He knew when adults were searching for truth and when they were only waiting for their turn to speak. No one was truly listening to Silas. When Silas testified, he spoke calmly. Some members of the jury seemed to expect innocence to sound louder. They expected rage, dramatic denial, or a fist striking the table. Silas had spent his life working around fragile mechanisms. He chose his words carefully. Vance used that caution against him. He made Silas confirm that his business had financial problems. He made him admit that he had been inside Marlowe's store. He made him admit that he knew where the security camera was mounted. He made him confirm that he owned a dark coat and walked with a limp. Each fact proved little by itself. Together, beneath Vance's confident voice, they became a cage. The jury found Silas guilty. Ruth made a sound Caleb had never heard from her before. It was not a scream. It was quieter and more painful, as if something inside her had torn, and there was not enough air left to release it. Silas Turner was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Roland Vance gave a statement, praising law enforcement and promising that Briar Creek would remain a town where criminals faced consequences. Cameras flashed while he spoke. That evening, local news described the case as a clean conviction. Caleb would later hate that phrase. Nothing about what followed was clean. Turner Clockworks closed within a month. Ruth tried to keep it alive, but customers never returned. The landlord waited until the legal deadline and changed the locks. Tools, shelves, and unfinished repairs were sold for a fraction of their value. A dealer from another county bought most of the clocks in bulk. Caleb saved only one. It was a small brass travel clock with a cracked glass face. He slipped it beneath his sweater before anyone could attach a price tag. That night, he wound it carefully and placed it beneath his pillow. The ticking was uneven, but it continued. Ruth and Caleb moved into a narrow room behind the laundromat where she worked at night. The walls trembled whenever the large machines entered their spin cycles. The air smelled of detergent, damp clothing, and warm metal. Caleb slept on a small cot beside cardboard boxes. Ruth slept in a folding chair and claimed it was comfortable. Caleb knew she was lying, but it was the kind of lie parents use to protect children from guilt. Every Wednesday, Ruth drove Caleb to visit Silas. The prison was 2 hours away. Caleb hated the metal detector, the locked doors, the plastic chairs, and the guards who spoke to families, as if love were another item that needed inspection. Silas always smiled when they arrived. That smile hurt more than anything. He asked about school. He asked about Ruth's health. He asked whether Caleb had kept the brass clock running. He rarely spoke about the 16-year sentence. Perhaps the number was too large to hold an ordinary conversation. One afternoon, Caleb finally asked why the truth had not saved him. Silas stared through the scratched plastic barrier for a long time. He could have told his son that truth always won in the end. It would have sounded comforting. It would also have been dishonest. Instead, Silas explained that truth did not fail because it was weak. It failed when people stopped looking for it. That sentence followed Caleb home. It remained with him during the long bus ride, through Ruth's exhausted silence, and into the room behind the laundromat. That night, Caleb lay awake with the brass clock ticking beside his pillow. He thought about 8:18. He thought about the access card at 9:07. He thought about the 911 call at 9:22. The numbers were supposed to belong to the same night, but they did not move together. They were like gears from different clocks, forced into the same mechanism. For the first time, Caleb's grief began to change. It did not become hope. Not yet. It became a question. If the law was built from books, records, timestamps, photographs, signatures, and statements, perhaps it was not an invisible monster. Perhaps it was a machine, a massive machine. A machine powerful enough to crush people when the wrong part failed. And every broken machine left a trace. Caleb began going to the Briar Creek Public Library after school. The legal books were stored on a lower shelf near outdated tax manuals. They were heavy, dusty, and filled with words that seemed designed to keep ordinary people outside. Affidavit, transcript, petition, evidentiary hearing, chain of custody, post-conviction relief, procedural default. At first, Caleb understood almost nothing, so he copied the words into a notebook and looked them up one by one. He whispered them beneath his breath until they stopped sounding like locked doors. He searched old newspaper articles. He read court summaries. He learned how to request public records. Ruth tried to stop him. She believed Silas was innocent, but she had already watched the system take her husband, their home, their business, and nearly all her strength. She did not want it to take Caleb's childhood too. She told him some doors were too heavy for a child to open. Caleb asked whether they became lighter when everyone stopped pushing. Ruth had no answer. By the time he turned 9, the library staff recognized him. He came after school, on weekends, and during Ruth's longest shifts. He drew timelines on sheets of paper and taped them together because one page was not large enough to contain everything that felt wrong. He wrote the 3 times repeatedly: 8:18, 9:07, 9:22. That was when Marion Whitaker noticed him. Marion was 73 and had spent 38 years working as a court clerk. She had watched lawyers enter courtrooms full of confidence and leave without understanding the lives they had changed. She knew how cases disappeared beneath paperwork. She knew how a missing signature, an incorrect date, or an unexamined record could become the difference between freedom and prison. Retirement had made her quieter, but it had not made her forget. For several weeks, Marion watched Caleb from across the library. She saw him struggle with court forms too complicated for his age. She watched him feed coins into the photocopier, copying pages from his father's case. One afternoon, she asked what he was working on. Caleb hesitated. Adults often sounded interested just before telling him to stop. He said it was his father's case. When Marion heard the name Silas Turner, her expression shifted. She remembered the trial. She remembered how quickly it had moved. She remembered Roland Vance discussing the conviction at political events. She remembered courthouse employees whispering that Brian Kell had seemed unprepared. Most of all, she remembered thinking that the timeline felt too neat. Marion asked to see Caleb's notes. She read for almost an hour without speaking. Caleb expected her to tell him he misunderstood the law. Instead, she paused at the 911 log, then at the access record, then at the camera timestamp. Finally, Marion told him that if he wanted to understand a broken case, he would need the whole record, not only the pieces adults had allowed him to see. That was how Caleb found his first ally. Marion did not promise to free Silas. She knew too much about the system to offer easy hope. She helped Ruth file requests for transcripts and evidence. She explained legal terms Caleb had misunderstood. She showed him which documents mattered and which only looked important. Most importantly, she did not take the investigation away from him. She guided him, but she allowed him to keep searching. Together, they rebuilt the night of March 10th. The camera said 8:18. Silas's access card said 9:07. The 911 record said 9:22. Owen's first statement said he called police immediately after the robber left. If Owen was telling the truth, the robbery could not have happened at 8:18. Marion requested the original still photographs from the security footage. Weeks later, they arrived in a worn brown envelope. Caleb spread them across a library table. At first, he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He studied the robber. The dark coat, the broad shoulders, the lowered head, the uneven walk. The image was too unclear to identify anyone, yet close enough to Silas's shape to explain why frightened people had stopped looking. Marion watched Caleb struggle with the resemblance. Then she asked what his father would examine if the photograph were a broken clock. Caleb looked up. Marion reminded him that a clockmaker did not stare only at the hand that had stopped. He studied the entire mechanism. So Caleb stopped looking at the robber. He looked at the counter, the coffee machine, the rack of snacks, the mop bucket near the aisle, the bank deposit bag beneath Owen's arm. The sign on the front door turned to show closed. Then Caleb saw the red rooster clock. It hung behind the register, partly hidden beneath glare. The black hands were thin against the pale face. but Caleb had spent years learning to read clocks from difficult angles. The timestamp in the corner of the security image read 8:18 p.m. The red rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. Caleb leaned closer. He checked the next image. The same difference. He checked another. Still 1 hour. His father had repaired that clock 2 weeks before the robbery. Silas had checked its movement and ensured it kept accurate time. Caleb looked at Marion, afraid to trust what he was seeing. Marion reached for a calendar. March 10th was the first day after daylight saving time began. Owen had moved the hands of the wall clock forward by 1 hour, but the old security recorder had not updated automatically. The camera timestamp was 1 hour slow. The robbery had not happened at 8:18. It had happened at 9:18. Suddenly, every piece moved into place. Owen's 911 call at 9:22 came 4 minutes after the robbery, exactly as his first statement claimed. Silas's access card showed him entering a storage facility 13 miles away at 9:07. He could not have reached Marlowe's corner market 11 minutes later. For 2 years, Silas Turner had been imprisoned because everyone trusted a camera without checking its clock. The truth had not been missing. It had been ticking in the background of the evidence from the beginning. But finding the truth and proving it in court were not the same thing. Marion knew Roland Vance would fight them. His reputation, his campaign, and perhaps several other convictions depended on keeping the Turner case closed. They would need the security system manual, dispatch records, access logs, maintenance documents, and Owen Marlowe's testimony. They would need to make frightened adults admit that a child had seen what they had ignored. And before Caleb could ask his one question in court, Roland Vance would use every part of his power to make sure the truth never reached the witness stand. Roland Vance learned about the new evidence before the hearing date was announced. By then, Marion had helped Ruth submit the security photographs, the access card record, the emergency dispatch log, and the manual for the old camera system. The documents were enough to force the court to take a second look, but not enough to guarantee justice. Marion knew that courts did not reopen convictions simply because the truth seemed obvious to a family. The truth had to survive procedure, opposition, and the pride of everyone whose reputation depended on the original verdict remaining untouched. Vance understood the danger immediately. If the robbery had taken place at 9:18 rather than 8:18, Silas's conviction did not merely become questionable, it became impossible to defend. The access log placed him more than 13 miles away, 11 minutes before the crime. Owen's emergency call supported the corrected time. The red rooster clock supported it. Even the store's closing routine supported it. But Silas was not the only thing Vance could lose. The Turner conviction had appeared in his campaign speeches. He had praised it as proof that his office trusted evidence over excuses. He had used the case to present himself as a prosecutor who moved quickly, protected elderly victims, and refused to be manipulated by emotional defenses. If a 10-year-old boy proved that his office had ignored the most basic question in the case, voters would not see a minor technical error. They would see arrogance. And once people began questioning one conviction, they might begin questioning others. Vance could not allow that. He did not threaten Ruth directly. That would have been too crude and too easy to expose. Instead, a local reporter received an anonymous suggestion that the Turner family was using Caleb's age to create public sympathy. An article appeared describing the new evidence as an emotional theory developed by a grieving child and a retired clerk with no authority to retry the case. The article did not call Caleb foolish. It did something more effective. It made him sound harmless. At school, the whispers returned. Some children said Caleb was pretending to be a lawyer. Others said his mother wanted money from the county. One teacher advised him privately that he should focus on school and leave legal matters to adults. Caleb listened without arguing. Adults had handled the legal matters before. His father was still in prison. Ruth found the article folded beneath their door one morning. Someone had circled the phrase emotional theory in red ink. She tore the page in half, then into smaller pieces, but Caleb had already seen it. He told her it did not matter. Ruth looked at him and recognized the same careful expression Silas used when hiding pain. She wanted to tell Caleb he did not have to be brave all the time. She wanted to take the files away, close the notebooks, and protect what remained of his childhood. But the hearing was now their only path forward. and turning back would not restore anything already lost. So Ruth did what she had done for 2 years. She kept moving. Marion focused on the evidence. She found an archived copy of the camera recorder's operating manual, which confirmed that the system did not automatically adjust for daylight saving time. The clock had to be changed manually through a sequence of menus Owen Marlowe had never learned to use. They obtained a certified copy of Silas's access card scan at 9:07:43 p.m. They confirmed the storage facility was 13.4 miles from Marlowe's corner market. Even under ideal conditions, the drive took more than 17 minutes. They also found a service receipt from St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. Silas had signed it at 8:46 p.m. after adjusting the church's large wall clock for the time change. A church custodian remembered seeing him leave. Each piece strengthened the corrected timeline. But the most important witness remained Owen Marlowe. Without Owen confirming his closing routine and the accuracy of the red rooster clock, Vance could argue that the wall clock had been wrong, that the photograph was unclear, or that the time difference was only speculation. Marion went to see him. Marlowe's corner. Market looked older than Caleb remembered. The soda sign still flickered. One gas pump had been covered with a plastic sheet. The bell above the entrance rang too late, sounding only after Marion had stepped fully inside. Owen stood behind the counter with both hands resting on the edge. The red rooster clock still hung behind him. It was ticking. Marion introduced herself and explained why she had come. Owen did not ask her to sit. He did not offer coffee. He kept wiping the same section of counter with a cloth that was already dry. At first, he repeated what he had said during the original investigation. The robber had been tall. The man had moved like Silas. He had known the store. The camera showed the time. Marion asked whether he had adjusted the wall clock on the morning of March 10th. Owen's hand stopped moving, only for a second. Then he said he did not remember. Marion asked whether the security recorder had been adjusted. Owen said he did not know. She asked what time he usually closed on Sundays. 9 o'clock, he answered automatically. Then he realized what he had said. His eyes moved toward the rooster clock. Marion saw fear settle over him before he lowered his gaze. A few days earlier, someone from Vance's office had visited the store. The assistant had spoken politely, almost kindly. He reminded Owen that changing his testimony could cause serious problems. People might accuse him of helping convict an innocent man. Silas's family might sue him. Insurance investigators might reopen the robbery claim. Customers might stop trusting him. No one told Owen to lie. They only explained how painful the truth could become. Fear completed the rest. Owen told Marion that 2 years was a long time. He said his memory was unreliable. He said maybe he had flipped the closed sign early that night. Maybe he had prepared the deposit before 9. Maybe the rooster clock had been wrong despite Silas's repair. Marion knew those possibilities had not come from memory. They had been given to him as hiding places. She did not accuse him. She only said that Silas had already paid for Owen's fear with 2 years of his life. Owen looked away. When Marion returned to the laundromat, Caleb knew from her expression that the meeting had gone badly. She spread her notes across the small table. They had the technical evidence, but Owen planned to say he could not remember. Vance would use that uncertainty to attack everything else. He would argue that the wall clock might have been inaccurate, that the store routine could vary, and that the defense was forcing meaning into an unclear photograph. Marion began preparing questions. She wrote them carefully, one after another. Had Owen personally changed the security recorder after daylight saving time? Did he know whether the system updated automatically? Had the red rooster clock been keeping accurate time? Did he call 911 immediately after the robber left? Was the closed sign turned before or after the last customer departed? Did he prepare the bank deposit before or after closing? The list grew longer. Caleb copied the questions and studied them every night. He understood why Marion had written each one. The questions were precise. They were logical. They covered every important detail. But something felt wrong. Whenever Caleb imagined Owen on the witness stand, he saw the old man retreating behind the same answer. I do not remember. A technical question gave him somewhere to hide. A question about the camera allowed him to blame the machine. A question about daylight saving time allowed him to claim confusion. A question about the exact minute allowed Vance to argue that trauma had damaged his memory. Caleb did not need Owen to explain the technology. He needed him to remember his own life. The night before the hearing, Caleb sat on the floor of the room behind the laundromat. Ruth had fallen asleep in the folding chair, with her shoes still on. The building had gone quiet, except for one dryer, turning slowly in the next room. The security photographs lay around Caleb. He studied the image again. The robber stood near the counter. Owen was behind the register. The closed sign had been turned. The mop bucket was near the aisle. The bank deposit bag rested beneath Owen's arm. The red rooster clock showed 9:18. Caleb thought about the way his father repaired clocks. When an entire mechanism seemed wrong, Silas never touched every gear at once. He searched for the single part that explained all the others. Caleb picked up Marion's list of questions. He crossed out the first one, then the second, then another. He continued until nearly every line disappeared beneath his pencil. When Marion arrived the next morning, Caleb handed her the page. Only one idea remained. Marion read it twice. The question did not mention the camera. It did not mention the time change. It did not accuse Owen of lying. It did not sound like a lawyer's question at all. That was precisely why it might work. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread through Briar Creek. Reporters filled the hallway. Some people had come because they believed Silas was innocent. Others came because they wanted to see whether a child's theory would collapse under real scrutiny. Roland Vance stood near the courtroom doors, speaking with two assistants. His suit was dark, his tie perfectly centered, his expression calm. When he saw Caleb, he gave the boy a brief smile. It was not kindness. It was the smile of a man reminding an opponent that the room belonged to him. Silas was brought into court wearing a plain shirt Ruth had sent through his attorney. Prison had changed him. He was thinner. Gray had begun to appear in his beard. His shoulders curved slightly forward, as though 2 years of being watched had taught him to occupy less space. Caleb wanted to run to him. The rules did not allow it. So father and son looked at one another across the room. Silas glanced at the papers in Caleb's hands. Then he gave the smallest nod. It was the same nod he used to give at the workbench when Caleb had finally placed a delicate gear in the correct position. Judge Helena Cross entered, and the courtroom rose. She was known for strict procedure and little patience for courtroom drama. That worried Ruth. It reassured Marion. A judge who disliked drama might be more willing to listen to evidence that did not depend on it. The hearing began with Marion presenting the newly discovered material through the attorney assisting the family. The access record was entered. The 911 log was entered. The service receipt from St. Bartholomew's was entered. The security system manual was entered. Vance challenged every piece. He argued that an access scan proved only that Silas's card had been used, not necessarily that Silas himself had used it. He suggested another person could have carried the card, even though no evidence supported that theory. He said the church receipt did not establish where Silas went afterward. He said the 911 call showed only when Owen contacted police, not when the robbery occurred. He called the wall clock interpretation unreliable because the security image was grainy and taken from an angle. Each argument was weak alone, but Vance delivered them with the confidence of a man who knew certainty could make speculation sound reasonable. Then Owen Marlowe was called to the witness stand. The old man walked slowly. He held his hat in both hands until the clerk told him to set it aside. When he took the oath, his voice trembled. At first, the questions were simple. He confirmed that he owned Marlowe's Corner Market. He confirmed that Silas had repaired the red rooster clock 2 weeks before the robbery. He confirmed the store normally closed at 9 on Sunday nights. Then Marion's side asked whether he had changed the wall clock for daylight saving time. Owen looked toward Vance. It was a quick glance. Judge Cross saw it. So did Caleb. Owen said he could not remember. He was asked whether he had changed the security recorder. He said he did not know how. He was asked whether the wall clock had been keeping accurate time. He said he believed so, but could not be certain. The questions moved closer to the central issue, and Owen's answers became less useful. He could not remember. It had been too long. The robbery had frightened him. He might have prepared the deposit early. He might have flipped the closed sign before 9. He might have waited before calling 911. Vance sat at the prosecution table with his hands folded. He did not need Owen to defend the original timeline. He only needed him to make the truth sound uncertain. When Vance questioned him, his tone became gentle. He reminded Owen that the night had been traumatic. He asked whether fear could affect memory. Owen agreed. He asked whether Owen had ever personally inspected the internal settings of the security recorder. Owen said no. He asked whether Owen could swear that the rooster clock had been perfectly accurate that evening. Owen hesitated. Then he said no. Vance thanked him and sat down. The faintest satisfaction crossed his face. The defense had found a discrepancy, but he believed he had contained it. A frightened witness, an old clock, and a technical manual were not enough to overturn a jury's verdict if he could keep doubt scattered across the room. Judge Cross reviewed her notes. She asked whether either side had additional evidence. Marion looked at Caleb. This was the moment they had discussed, but now that it had arrived, it felt impossible. Caleb's mouth had gone dry. The courtroom seemed larger than before. The distance between his chair and the witness stand felt longer than the distance from Briar Creek to the prison. Ruth placed a hand over his. She did not tell him he had to do it. That helped him stand. The movement was small, but the courtroom noticed. Caleb rose beside the defense table. Roland Vance turned. Caleb asked the judge for permission to put one question to Owen Marlowe. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vance was on his feet immediately. He objected that Caleb was a child, not counsel. He said allowing the boy to participate would turn a serious legal proceeding into emotional theater. He warned that grief was not evidence, and sympathy could not replace procedure. He spoke as though he were protecting the dignity of the court. But Caleb watched his jaw tighten. The prosecutor was afraid. Judge Cross called for silence. She looked at Marion, then at the attorney assisting the Turners, then at Caleb. She asked whether the proposed question had been reviewed. Marion confirmed that it had. She explained that Caleb's question concerned the witness's established business routine and would not require legal argument. Vance objected again. Judge Cross stopped him. She said the purpose of the hearing was to determine whether a man had been imprisoned under a materially false timeline. If a relevant question had been overlooked because the person who thought of it happened to be 10 years old, the court would not protect its pride by refusing to hear it. She allowed Caleb one line of inquiry. No speech. No argument. Only the question. Caleb stepped toward the witness stand. The microphone stood above his mouth. A deputy retrieved a small wooden platform from beside the clerk's desk and placed it beneath his feet. The sight of the boy standing on that box changed something in the room. For 2 years, adults with badges, titles, degrees, and authority had controlled Silas Turner's fate. Now his son needed a wooden step simply to be tall enough for them to hear him. Caleb looked at Owen. The old man could not hold his gaze. Caleb did not ask about the timestamp. He did not ask about the camera manual. He did not ask whether the rooster clock had been accurate. Instead, he asked what time Marlowe's Corner Market normally closed on Sunday nights. Owen blinked. The question was so ordinary that his prepared fear had nowhere to go. He answered automatically. 9 o'clock. Caleb asked whether Owen usually counted the register before closing or after closing. Vance rose. He objected that Caleb had been allowed one question, not a cross-examination. Judge Cross looked at Marion. Marion explained that the question was part of the same line of inquiry concerning store closing routine. The judge allowed Caleb to continue, but warned him to remain focused. Caleb asked again. Owen said he counted the register after closing. Caleb asked whether he turned the sign on the front door to closed before beginning the count. Owen's fingers tightened around the edge of the witness chair. He said yes. Caleb looked at the enlarged security photograph displayed beside the judge. His voice trembled, but he did not stop. He asked why, if the robbery had happened at 8:18, the photograph showed the closed sign already turned, the mop bucket pulled out, the bank deposit bag placed beside the register, and Owen performing the tasks he had just admitted he only did after the store closed at 9. No one moved. The question was not loud. It carried no accusation. That made it more powerful. Caleb was not asking Owen to understand machinery. He was asking him to remember the ordinary rhythm of his own life. Owen turned toward the image. For 2 years, everyone had directed his attention toward the robber. The coat, the shoulders, the height, the uneven walk. He had stared at the figure so often that the rest of the image had become invisible. Now he saw the store. He saw the sign. He saw the deposit bag. He saw the mop. He saw himself standing behind the counter in the familiar posture he used every Sunday after locking the door. Something changed in his face. Vance saw it and stood again. He argued that the question was misleading. He said routines could change. He said Owen might have closed early. He said the defense was manipulating an elderly witness through emotional details. His words came faster now. Too fast. Owen raised one hand. The gesture was weak, but it stopped the prosecutor. He said he remembered the mop. His voice was barely above a whisper. The courtroom leaned closer. Owen remembered pulling it from the storage area because the floor near the drink cooler had been sticky. He remembered the handle falling against the freezer after the robber left, making a hollow sound that startled him. He remembered turning the sign to closed. He remembered preparing the bank deposit. He remembered looking at the rooster clock because his wife had once trained him never to leave cash in the store after 9. Then he looked more closely at the clock in the photograph. The color left his face. Owen said Silas had repaired that clock. He said it had been keeping accurate time. He said he had moved the hands forward on the morning of March 10th because of daylight saving time. He remembered complaining about losing an hour. He remembered checking the rooster clock several times during the day because he did not trust himself to have adjusted it correctly. Judge Cross asked him directly whether the robbery had occurred before or after the store's normal closing time. Owen began to cry. After, he said. The word fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. The robbery happened after 9. Marion stood and requested permission to display the enlarged photograph beside the certified records. The judge allowed it. The timestamp in the corner read 8:18 p.m. The rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. The emergency call was received at 9:22. Silas's access card had been scanned 13 miles away at 9:07:43. The church receipt placed him at St. Bartholomew's until 8:46. The camera manual confirmed that the recorder did not automatically update for daylight saving time. What had once seemed like disconnected details now aligned with painful precision. The camera was 1 hour slow. The robbery happened at 9:18. Silas Turner could not have been there. For 2 years, the prosecution had treated the camera timestamp as the strongest evidence in the case. It had been the weakest clock in the entire story. Owen lowered his head and apologized. At first, no one knew whether he was speaking to Silas, Caleb, Ruth, or the judge. Then he turned toward the defense table. He told Silas he was sorry. He said fear had convinced him that uncertainty was safer than truth. He admitted Vance's office had warned him about lawsuits, insurance problems, and public blame if his memory changed. No one had ordered him to lie. They had only made honesty feel dangerous. Silas did not answer. His face remained still, but tears filled his eyes. The truth he had repeated for 2 years was finally being spoken by someone the court had always considered worthy of belief. Roland Vance attempted to recover. He argued that Owen's renewed memory had been influenced by Caleb's questions. He said the wall clock could still have been inaccurate. He insisted that the court should not overturn a jury verdict based on an emotional reconstruction of store routine. Judge Cross asked whether his office had verified the security recorder's time settings before the original trial. Vance said the footage had been authenticated. The judge repeated the question. Had anyone verified the clock? Vance began explaining that the timestamp had been accepted by investigators. Judge Cross interrupted. She asked whether his office had compared the 8:18 timestamp with the 9:22 emergency call. Vance said trauma could explain a delayed report. She asked whether his office had investigated the access card scan at 9:07. He said the scan did not prove Silas personally used the card. Judge Cross asked whether the prosecution had presented any evidence that someone else possessed it. Vance had no answer. She asked whether the defense had received enlarged stills, clearly showing the rooster clock. Vance said the photographs had been available in the evidence file. The words harmed him more than he realized. Available. The truth had been available. The wall clock had been visible. The 911 record had existed. The access scan had existed. The daylight saving time change had been public knowledge. None of it had been hidden. It had simply been treated as less important than the story Vance wanted the jury to believe. Judge Cross recessed the hearing. The courtroom erupted the moment she left. Reporters rushed into the hallway. People spoke over one another. Deputies tried to keep the aisles clear. Ruth remained seated, one hand pressed over her mouth. Marion gathered the papers carefully, though her fingers shook. Caleb stepped down from the wooden platform. The adrenaline left him so quickly that his knees nearly failed. Then Silas called his name. Caleb turned. For the first time in 2 years, there was no glass between them. A deputy allowed Silas to move closer while the court remained in recess. Father and son stood only a few feet apart, both uncertain what the rules permitted. Silas reached out his hand. Caleb took it. The hand felt thinner than he remembered, but it was warm. Silas looked at his son with pride, gratitude and pain so deep that no single expression could hold all of it. He did not say Caleb had saved him. That would have placed too much weight on a child already carrying more than he should. He only said Caleb had listened. Caleb understood. His father had taught him that every broken thing left a trace. Caleb had simply refused to stop searching for it. When Judge Cross returned, the courtroom rose again. Her expression was controlled, but her voice carried a different weight. She reviewed the evidence slowly. The original prosecution had relied on a robbery time of 8:18 p.m. That time came solely from an unverified security camera timestamp. The recorder had not been adjusted after daylight saving time. The store's wall clock showed approximately 9:18. The witness's established closing routine supported a post-9 o'clock robbery. The emergency call at 9:22 supported that timeline. The access card record placed Silas Turner more than 13 miles away at 9:07. The discrepancy was not minor. It destroyed the prosecution's timeline. Judge Cross said the original jury had never been given the opportunity to consider the corrected time. The defense attorney had failed to investigate material evidence. The prosecution had presented the camera timestamp as objective truth without confirming its accuracy. Then she looked directly at Silas. She said the conviction could not stand. Ruth folded forward as if the strength holding her upright for 2 years had suddenly been removed. Marion caught her before she slipped from the bench. Caleb stared at the judge. He heard the words, but his mind could not immediately make them real. The conviction was vacated. Silas Turner was to be released from custody, while the state determined whether any lawful prosecution could continue without the false timeline. Judge Cross added that given the corrected evidence and the absence of reliable identification, the court saw no legitimate basis for holding him further. For 2 years, Silas had measured his life by prison bells, meal schedules, locked doors, visiting hours, and lights-out commands. Now a judge told him he could go home. Silas closed his eyes. A tear moved down his face. The courtroom began to react, but Judge Cross raised her hand. She was not finished. She said the hearing had revealed failures too serious to be treated as an isolated mistake. The prosecution had relied on technical evidence without verifying it. Contradictory records had been dismissed. A poor defendant's alibi had been treated as an inconvenience rather than a constitutional obligation. She ordered that the Attorney General's office receive the full record of the case. She also requested an independent review of other convictions prosecuted by Roland Vance, in which disputed surveillance timestamps had served as central evidence. The color drained from Vance's face. There was the consequence he had not prepared for. For years, he had built his reputation on clean timelines, decisive prosecutions, and cameras he claimed could not lie. Now those same timelines would be reopened. The evidence he had used to close doors would be used to open files. His career would not be destroyed by a political rival. It would be destroyed by the question he had been too arrogant to ask. The courtroom adjourned. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as Silas emerged beside Ruth, Caleb, and Marion. The late afternoon sky stretched above them without bars, concrete, or razor wire. Silas stopped walking. He looked upward. Caleb watched his father study the open sky, as if it were another kind of clock, too wide to measure and too beautiful to trust immediately. Reporters shouted questions. Did he forgive the prosecutor? Would he sue the county? How did it feel to be free? Was Caleb a genius? Silas did not answer at first. Then he said, the truth had been there from the beginning. His family should never have needed a child to find what trained adults had refused to examine. It was not the triumphant statement the reporters expected. It was more powerful than triumph. It was an indictment. That evening, Silas did not return to the home he remembered. The old house was gone. Turner Clockworks was gone. The workbench, the shelves, the clocks, and the faded sign had been sold or scattered. Freedom returned him to a world that had continued moving without him. He went instead to the narrow room behind the laundromat. Ruth opened the door. For a moment, Silas stood among the boxes, the folding chair, Caleb's small cot, and the machines vibrating through the wall. No one knew what to say. Caleb had imagined his father's return 1,000 times. He had imagined laughter, celebration, and the instant restoration of everything the conviction had taken. But justice did not rewind time. It only stopped the lie from taking more. Silas placed his small bag of prison belongings on the floor. Then he noticed the brass travel clock with the cracked face sitting beside Caleb's bed. Caleb had kept it running. Silas picked it up carefully and held it near his ear. The ticking was uneven. Still alive. He looked at Caleb and smiled. It was the first smile his son had seen that didn't have prison glass behind it. But freedom would not erase what had happened. Roland Vance's downfall was only beginning. Owen Marlowe still had to face the cost of his fear. Ruth still carried 2 years of exhaustion inside her. Silas had returned home, but part of him remained trapped in schedules, locked doors, and memories no judge could vacate. And Caleb, now praised by the same town that had once mocked him, would soon learn that being proven right did not automatically make the world kind. The case had ended. The healing had not. Freedom did not arrive like the ending of a story. That was the first thing Caleb learned after Silas Turner walked out of the courthouse and the people of Briar Creek began calling him innocent. For 2 years, the town had treated Silas as though a prison sentence could define the whole of a man. Then, in a single afternoon, the same town tried to reverse itself with headlines, handshakes, apologies, and expressions of shock. But a changed headline could not return a stolen year. It could not rebuild Turner Clockworks. It could not erase the nights Ruth had slept in a folding chair behind the laundromat. It could not give Caleb back the part of his childhood spent studying court transcripts beneath buzzing library lights. And it could not teach Silas how to feel free, simply because a judge had opened a door. On his first night home, Silas barely slept. Caleb woke before dawn and saw his father sitting at the small table beside the brass travel clock. The room was dark, except for the weak light coming through the laundromat window. Outside, one of the machines had entered its final spin cycle, making the wall tremble gently. Silas held the clock near his ear. He wound it, listened, adjusted the crown, and listened again. The clock did not need that much attention. Caleb knew it. Silas knew it too. But after 2 years of guards, searches, count times, locked doors, and hands that were never allowed to move without permission, his fingers needed something delicate to trust him again. Caleb remained near the doorway. He wanted to say something comforting. He wanted to tell his father the nightmare was over. But Silas had taught him not to make claims that time had not proven. The nightmare had changed. That was not the same as ending. Silas noticed him and placed the clock on the table. He apologized for waking him. Caleb said the machines had done that. They both knew it was not true. For several minutes, father and son sat in silence. Then Silas asked whether Caleb had wound the clock every day. Caleb admitted that he had sometimes wound it twice because he was afraid it would stop. Silas examined the cracked glass face and smiled faintly. He said a clock did not need to look untouched in order to keep going. Sometimes the crack became part of the way a person remembered what it had survived. Caleb understood that his father was not only talking about the clock. Ruth understood too. She had spent 2 years surviving through movement. Motel rooms in the morning, laundry in the evening, prison visits on Wednesdays, bills sorted at night. She had lived so long without permission to collapse that when Silas returned, her body did not know how to rest. She continued waking before her alarm. She continued saving food as if the next meal were uncertain. Whenever an unfamiliar number appeared on her phone, fear moved through her before reason could catch it. At the grocery store, she checked prices twice and then checked them again. Silas once told her she did not have to work both jobs anymore. Ruth looked at him as though he had suggested she step from a moving train. She had learned not to trust stability. A conviction could take a husband. A landlord could take a shop. A town could take a reputation. A single mistake could take everything while insisting it was following procedure. Ruth loved that Silas had come home, but love did not automatically make her feel safe. Some nights, they sat beside one another without speaking. They did not need to explain the distance. It had been built from prison walls, collect calls, financial fear, and 2 years of learning how to live separately while still believing they belonged together. They began repairing that distance in small ways. Silas walked Ruth to the motel before sunrise. Ruth brought him coffee while he sorted through the few tools that remained. They ate dinner together even when no one had much appetite. Sometimes they spoke about what had happened. Sometimes they chose not to. Caleb watched them and learned that healing rarely arrived through one powerful conversation. More often, it came through ordinary acts repeated until the body began to believe the danger had passed. The town had its own way of reacting. Some people came to apologize. The first was an elderly woman whose mantel clock Silas had repaired years earlier. She arrived at the laundromat holding a pie and crying before Ruth opened the door. She admitted she had believed the news reports. She admitted she had stopped visiting the shop because she had been afraid of what neighbors might say. She did not ask Silas to tell her everything was fine. She simply said she had failed him. Silas accepted the pie. He did not immediately accept the apology. The woman seemed to understand. Others came with longer explanations. They said the evidence had looked convincing. They said everyone had trusted Roland Vance. They said no ordinary person could have known the camera was wrong. What they wanted was not forgiveness. They wanted relief from the discomfort of knowing they had chosen the easiest story. Ruth had little patience for those apologies. She listened when she felt able. When she did not, she closed the door. Silas never criticized her for it. He understood that forgiveness offered under pressure was only another form of surrender. At school, Caleb's world changed almost overnight. The same principal who had once advised him not to bring attention to his father's case called him into the office and said the entire school was proud. A teacher suggested holding an assembly in his honor. Children who had mocked him now wanted to sit beside him at lunch. One boy asked whether Caleb remembered him. Caleb remembered him perfectly. He remembered the toy clock placed on his desk. He remembered the joke about his father stealing time. He remembered the teacher looking away. The boy apologized. Not well. He said he had only repeated what other people were saying. Caleb looked at him and realized most cruelty traveled that way. It passed from one frightened or careless person to another, until no one felt responsible for carrying it. Caleb did not say they were friends again. He said they could start by being honest. That answer spread through the school before lunch. Some students began calling him the courtroom boy. Others called him the clock boy. Reporters called him a legal prodigy. A television producer called Ruth and offered to fly the family to New York for an interview. Another wanted to build an entire program around Caleb's question. Ruth refused most of them. The first time she agreed to a local interview, she regretted it almost immediately. The reporter repeatedly asked Caleb how it felt to be a hero. Caleb tried to explain that he had not wanted to become a hero. He had wanted his father to come home. The reporter asked whether Caleb planned to become a lawyer. Caleb said he was 10. The moment never appeared in the broadcast. Instead, the program used a dramatic photograph of him standing on the wooden platform beneath the courtroom microphone. The caption called him the boy who defeated a prosecutor. Silas switched off the television. He told Caleb that people liked stories with one hero and one villain because complicated truth made them uncomfortable. But no child should have needed to defeat anyone. The adults should have done their jobs before Caleb ever opened the first law book. Caleb asked whether he should stop speaking about the case. Silas said no. He should speak when the truth might help someone. But he should never let strangers convince him that his pain belonged to them. The formal dismissal of the charges came 3 weeks after the hearing. The document arrived in a thin white envelope. Ruth held it for nearly an hour before opening it. She had imagined that moment during sleepless nights, but the real paper seemed too light for what it carried. It contained several paragraphs of legal language and a few lines stating that the state would not continue prosecution. Case dismissed. Conviction vacated. No further basis for detention. Ruth read the words twice. Then she began laughing. The sound startled Caleb. It was not joy exactly. It was the sound of a body releasing pressure through whatever opening remained. Silas placed his hand on the document. For 2 years, the state had used paper to define him as guilty. Now another piece of paper admitted that the first one should never have existed. He did not smile. He asked Ruth to place the dismissal beside the cracked brass clock. The two objects remained together on the small table for weeks. proof that the law had corrected itself. Proof that correction had come too late. While the Turner family tried to rebuild, Roland Vance tried to control the damage. He released a public statement claiming he respected the court's decision and remained committed to the integrity of the justice system. He described the incorrect timestamp as an unusual technical problem that could not reasonably have been anticipated during the original prosecution. He did not mention the 911 call. He did not mention the access card record. He did not mention the photograph that had been available from the beginning. And he did not mention the pressure placed on Owen Marlowe before the hearing. For a few days, the explanation worked. Vance still had supporters. Some insisted that one mistake should not destroy a career. Others said he had acted in good faith. His campaign team attempted to move forward, quietly removing references to the Turner conviction from speeches and promotional material. Then the Independent Review found another case. 6 years earlier, a warehouse worker named Thomas Reed had been accused of helping burglarize an electronics store. Surveillance footage appeared to place a vehicle similar to his near the building shortly after midnight. Reed claimed he had been inside a distribution center at the time, but the prosecution argued that another employee could have used his identification badge. The camera timestamp had never been independently verified. Reed had accepted a plea bargain after his public defender warned that juries trusted video more than testimony. He had served 3 years. A review of the recording system showed that its internal clock was 27 minutes fast. The corrected timeline supported Reed's workplace alibi. His conviction was reopened. Then came another case. A young mother had been convicted of participating in a pharmacy theft, based partly on video from a neighboring parking lot. She had insisted she was collecting her child from an emergency clinic across town. Clinic records appeared to conflict with the timestamp, but Vance's office dismissed them as potentially inaccurate. The camera had changed time zones after a software reset. Another case involved a gas station robbery and a recorder that had lost power several days before the crime. When it restarted, its clock reverted to a default time. Investigators never checked. Not every reviewed conviction collapsed. Some remained supported by fingerprints, witness identification, or confessions. But enough cases showed the same habit. Vance's office treated technical evidence as absolute when it helped the prosecution. When conflicting records supported a defendant, they were labeled confusion, coincidence, or manipulation. The problem was no longer one broken camera. It was a philosophy. Roland Vance had not always needed to invent facts. He had simply decided which facts deserved authority. The newspapers that once praised his decisiveness began printing detailed timelines of his cases. Donors stopped returning calls. Political allies who had attended his fundraisers appeared on television, discussing the importance of accountability. His campaign for state judge collapsed within 2 months. The state bar opened an inquiry. The attorney general requested internal emails and case files. Former employees began speaking anonymously about pressure to preserve conviction rates. One assistant admitted that prosecutors were rewarded for closing cases quickly and discouraged from exploring alternative timelines once an arrest had been made. Vance resigned before the investigation ended. In his resignation statement, he claimed he did not want his personal situation to distract from the work of justice. Marion read the sentence aloud while sitting at Ruth's small table. She laughed until her eyes watered. Silas did not laugh. He said powerful men often called the truth a distraction when it finally entered the room without permission. The Turner case became known across the state. But Silas wanted less attention, not more. He struggled to enter crowded places. He disliked people standing behind him. He ate quickly, then apologized when he noticed Ruth watching. He woke before sunrise and sometimes folded his blankets with prison precision before remembering no one would inspect them. He visited the old Turner Clockwork storefront only once. Caleb found him standing across the street. The faded blue door had been painted gray. The window now displayed advertisements for tax preparation and payday loans. Nothing remained of the clocks, the workbench, or the quiet afternoons Caleb had spent sorting brass screws beside his father. Silas stared for a long time. Caleb asked whether he wanted the shop back. Silas shook his head. He said the strange thing about losing a place was that the walls continued standing as though they had not witnessed anything. A man could lose years, customers, reputation, and sleep, while the bricks remained available for someone else's sign. Caleb asked whether they would ever open another shop. Silas did not answer immediately. He looked toward the public library at the end of the street. Then he said perhaps, "Not there." Some rooms held the wrong silence. The new shop began as an idea Marion refused to let disappear. She found a narrow vacant property beside the Briar Creek Public Library. It had once been a used bookstore. The ceiling leaked near the back, one window would not open, and the floorboards carried years of dust. But morning light filled the front room. The location felt right. On one side stood the library where Caleb had learned to read the law. On the other would stand the place where Silas repaired time. The family did not yet have enough money. A civil suit against the county would take years. Donations had arrived after the hearing, but Ruth distrusted sudden generosity. Some people who contributed had not offered a single meal during the 2 years Silas was imprisoned. Silas told her help did not become useless, simply because guilt had brought it. They could accept the wood, paint, tools, and shelves without pretending every motive was pure. A legal foundation created a small recovery grant. St. Bartholomew's Church organized a fundraiser. The church custodian who had seen Silas on the night of the robbery donated several old workbenches. A retired carpenter repaired the floor. Marion arrived carrying boxes of broken courthouse clocks and announced that no new repair shop should open without enough unfinished work to create immediate regret. They cleaned the space together. Ruth scrubbed the windows. Caleb sorted donated tools. Silas repaired shelves, then repaired them again because he did not trust the first attempt. Some volunteers worked quietly. Others apologized while holding paintbrushes. Ruth allowed them to speak. She did not promise absolution. Above the entrance, Silas painted the new name by hand. Turner & Son Clockworks. Caleb stared at the sign for so long that Silas asked whether the spelling was wrong. Caleb said his name did not belong there. His father was the real clockmaker. Silas looked genuinely offended. He told Caleb that without him, there would be no shop and no clockmaker to reopen it. Caleb had kept the work alive when every adult around him had declared it finished. Below the shop name, Caleb painted a smaller sentence. "We restore what time almost took away." Silas complained that it sounded too poetic for a repair shop. Ruth cried when she saw it. Then Silas stopped complaining. Before the shop opened, Owen Marlowe came to see them. He did not arrive with reporters. He did not come during the fundraiser or stand where others could watch him apologize. He went to the laundromat on a quiet afternoon, carrying a cardboard box. Ruth saw him through the glass door and became still. For 2 years, Owen had been presented as the innocent victim and Silas as the dangerous man who had harmed him. Now Owen stood outside looking smaller than the box in his hands. Ruth considered refusing to let him enter. Silas told her it was her choice. That mattered. For so long, other people had controlled what happened to their family. Even a small choice deserved respect. Ruth opened the door. Owen stepped inside. He did not begin with excuses. He did not describe his fear of the robber or explain how Vance's office had influenced him. He did not ask Silas to understand how difficult the situation had been. He said he was sorry. He admitted that before the hearing, Vance's assistant had warned him about lawsuits, insurance investigations, and public blame. He admitted that no one had ordered him to lie. They had only shown him the consequences of remembering correctly. Owen had chosen fear. Silas had paid for it. Owen placed the box on the table. Inside was the red rooster clock. Its hands had been removed and wrapped in paper. Dust covered the chipped wooden body. Without the hands, the pale face looked strangely empty. Owen said he could no longer keep it in the store. Every time he looked at it, he saw the truth he had refused to face. But the clock had belonged to his wife, and he could not throw it away. He asked Silas to repair it one more time. Not for Marlowe's corner market, for his wife's grave. Ruth looked at Silas. Caleb looked at the clock. Silas remained silent for a long time. People often imagine forgiveness as a sudden, beautiful decision. Caleb learned that day that real forgiveness could feel more like opening the back of a damaged clock. A person did not know what condition the mechanism was in until the cover came off. Some parts might be cleaned, some might need replacement, some might never work as before. Finally, Silas agreed to repair it. Owen released a breath. Then Silas said he would charge him a fair price. Not more because of what happened. Not less because of guilt. Fair. Owen nodded immediately. He seemed relieved to pay. The price acknowledged that repair required labor and that the past had carried a cost. Before leaving, Owen apologized to Ruth. She told him she was not ready to forgive him. He lowered his head and said he understood. That was the first moment Caleb believed Owen's remorse might be real. True remorse did not demand comfort from the people it had harmed. Silas and Caleb repaired the rooster clock in the back of the new shop before opening day. They placed it beneath the workbench lamp. Silas removed the back while Caleb arranged the screws on dark velvet. The movement was dirty. One gear had worn unevenly. The minute hand had been bent during removal. Dust had gathered around the spring. The clock had not been destroyed. It had been neglected. Caleb watched his father clean each part. For the first time since prison, Silas's movements became fully steady. His hands remembered a language the rest of him was still relearning. Caleb polished the gear teeth. Silas adjusted the spring. Together, they realigned the hands. When Silas returned the movement to its case and wound it, nothing happened. Caleb's heart sank. Silas waited. He moved the pendulum gently. The clock ticked once, then again. The rhythm strengthened. Ruth stood in the doorway. Marion had stopped sorting boxes in the front room. All four listened. The sound was soft, steady. No one claimed the clock had redeemed the suffering. A repaired object could not return 2 years. But its ticking carried a meaning none of them needed to explain. The truth had been there all along. It had waited in the background until someone looked closely enough to hear it. Opening day arrived 1 year after Silas's release. Caleb wore a clean shirt. Ruth placed flowers in the window. Marion brought a cake that leaned to one side and insisted that perfectly straight cakes should never be trusted. At 9 o'clock, Silas stood beside the front door. For 2 years, other people had controlled every door he entered and left. Prison doors opened by command. Courtroom doors opened under guard. Even the laundromat room belonged to someone else. This door belonged to him. He turned the sign to open. The bell rang cleanly. For several minutes, no one came. Then an elderly woman entered with a pocket watch wrapped in a handkerchief. A church deacon followed with a mantel clock and an apology he could not say without looking at the floor. A young mother brought a cheap plastic clock shaped like a sunflower. She admitted it would cost less to buy a new one, but it had belonged to her grandmother. Silas accepted every repair with the same attention. By noon, the shelves were full. The town had not become perfect. Some people came because they were sorry. Some came because the Turners were now part of a story everyone wanted to stand beside. Some claimed they had always doubted the conviction, though Ruth remembered their silence clearly. She let them enter. She did not let them rewrite the past. Owen collected the rooster clock 2 days later. Silas placed it on the counter between them. The hands now moved accurately. The chipped paint remained. Silas had offered to restore the wooden body, but Owen asked him not to. He wanted the cracks to remain visible. He paid the full price. Before leaving, he looked at Caleb and said, he hoped the boy became whatever kind of man he wanted to become, not what strangers expected after the hearing. Caleb did not know how to respond. He nodded. Owen carried the clock away with both hands. Later, Silas framed an enlarged section of the original security photograph and hung it above the workbench. He cropped out the robber. He removed the counter and most of the store. Only the rooster clock and the timestamp remained. The timestamp read 8:18. The clock showed 9:18. Customers often asked why he kept an image connected to such a painful period. Silas always answered the same way. The truth was there from the beginning. The independent review of Vance's cases continued for more than a year. Thomas Reed's conviction was overturned. The young mother accused in the pharmacy case received a new trial, and the charges were dismissed after investigators confirmed her clinic alibi. Another man's sentence was reduced after hidden timeline inconsistencies undermined the prosecution's version of events. The Turner Review, as newspapers began calling it, did not prove every convicted person innocent. It did something more important and less dramatic. It forced the county to look again. New rules required independent verification of digital timestamps before trial. Surveillance systems had to be checked for time zone errors, power resets, and daylight saving time settings. Prosecutors could no longer present electronic time data as unquestionable without documenting how it had been verified. Marion became involved in a small legal aid project reviewing evidence in old cases. She complained constantly about the workload while arriving early every morning. Caleb continued visiting her at the library. He read appeals, evidence standards, and cases involving mistaken identification. He did not study because he believed the law was pure. He had seen what happened when law was handled carelessly. He studied because the law was too powerful to be left only to people who enjoyed hearing themselves speak. No one forced him to decide whether he would become a lawyer. Silas told him he had already spent enough of his childhood solving adult failures. So Caleb returned to school, repaired clocks on Saturdays, played basketball badly, and sometimes went entire days without thinking about a courtroom. That was its own kind of victory. 2 years after Silas's release, Judge Helena Cross visited Turner and Son Clockworks just before closing. She came alone, without robes, staff, or cameras. In her hands was a small wooden desk clock. Silas welcomed her politely. Caleb looked up from his homework. Judge Cross explained that the clock had belonged to her father. It had stopped years earlier, but she had kept it on her desk because some things remained important even when they no longer moved. She placed it on the counter. Then she looked at Caleb. She told him that courtrooms were filled with trained voices, confident voices, expensive voices, and voices accustomed to being obeyed. But during Silas's hearing, the smallest voice in the room had asked the clearest question. Caleb lowered his eyes. Praise still made him uncomfortable. Silas rescued him by asking the judge what seemed to be wrong with the clock. Judge Cross smiled and admitted she did not know. She said she had learned not to assume. After she left, Caleb asked his father whether justice had finally been done. Silas turned the judge's clock over in his hands. He listened to the silence inside it. Then he said, justice had begun. Caleb understood the difference. Done would mean the years returned. Done would mean Turner Clockworks never closed. Done would mean Ruth never slept in a chair. Caleb was never mocked. Owen never hid behind fear. And Vance never built a career by transforming uncertainty into guilt. Begun meant something smaller. Silas was home. The lie had been named. Several forgotten cases had been reopened. People were checking the clocks. After great harm, beginning was sometimes the only honest miracle available. That evening, Caleb and Silas closed the shop together. Ruth had gone ahead to prepare dinner. Marion had left a stack of papers on the counter with a note demanding coffee before anyone asked her to read them. The library lights glowed next door. Caleb turned off the front display. Around him, dozens of clocks continued ticking. They did not tick together. Some moved half a second ahead. Some fell slightly behind. Some sounded deep and formal. Others clicked softly. Yet each was being watched, adjusted, and cared for. The sound had once filled Caleb's childhood. Then it disappeared. Now it had returned. Not unchanged. Nothing truly returned unchanged. Silas stood beside him and listened. He said people often believed time only took things away. Youth, homes, chances, people we loved. But time also revealed. It wore paint from lies. It loosened what had been nailed shut. It carried buried details forward until someone patient enough noticed them. Caleb looked at the framed photograph. 8:18 in the corner, 9:18 on the wall. One wrong hour. On paper, it had looked like a technical mistake, a forgotten setting, a minor oversight. But that hour had taken a father from his son, a husband from his wife, a shop from its owner, and trust from a family that had done nothing to deserve losing it. Caleb had learned that small details were never small when powerful people built entire stories on top of them. A wrong hour could become a prison sentence. A flipped sign could become a clue. A frightened witness could become part of a lie. A child's question could become a key. And a clock no one bothered to examine could become the most honest witness in the room. Years later, people would still ask Caleb how he noticed what trained investigators, lawyers, and prosecutors had missed. He never liked the question. It made the answer sound like magic. There had been no magic. There had been prison visits, unpaid bills, library dust, pencil marks, sleepless nights, Marion's patience, Ruth's strength, Silas's lessons, and one child who refused to accept that a closed case meant a correct one. So Caleb answered simply. He noticed because his father had taught him to look at what everyone else dismissed. That was all. And that was everything. Injustice does not always arrive wearing a cruel face. Sometimes it arrives through hurry, through convenience, through a prosecutor who wants a clean victory, a lawyer too exhausted to ask one more question, a witness too frightened to correct the story, and a town too comfortable believing that the person closest to suspicion must be guilty. Justice does not always return with thunder. Sometimes it returns through an old woman reading records at a library table. Sometimes it returns through a mother who keeps standing after the world has taken almost everything. Sometimes it returns through a man who still believes broken things deserve care. And sometimes it returns through a 10-year-old boy standing on a wooden platform, asking an ordinary question that powerful adults were too certain to consider. The story of Silas and Caleb Turner was never proof that pain always carried a purpose. Pain did not become good simply because someone survived it. Nor was it proof that the system always corrected itself. Systems rarely correct themselves without people willing to disturb their comfort. The lesson was more honest than that. Never let confidence replace truth. Never allow authority to make you ashamed of asking a simple question. And never ignore a small detail, because powerful people are in a hurry to move on. Because somewhere, behind the person everyone is staring at, there may be a clock still pointing toward the truth. And sometimes, one honest question is enough to make the entire room finally hear it.
Stay down. People like you do not get to explain first.
Most people had already decided what he was.
We already know enough.
To the store security guard, he was an easy target. To the assistant manager, he was the perfect excuse.
I knew something was wrong.
And to the shoppers passing by with their carts and baskets, he was just an uncomfortable scene they could pretend not to see.
This does not feel right.
You should have checked the cameras first.
He noticed the manager watching too carefully.
The truth is still here.
And the young cashier looking terrified because she remembered the truth.
He paid. I saw him pay.
That camera was not supposed to see that.
My version is the one they will believe.
They thought the story would end with a quiet man being blamed, embarrassed, and erased.
No receipt, no proof.
But the man on that floor had spent years protecting records from people who thought power gave them the right to rewrite reality. And before the grocery store ever learned, it had chosen the wrong man to destroy. That morning had begun in the kind of darkness most people never noticed. Not the frightening kind, not the kind that filled headlines, but the slow blue darkness before sunrise, when working people moved through the world while everyone else was still asleep. Marcus had finished mopping the fourth-floor hallway of the Bryan County Courthouse just after 5 in the morning. The courthouse was empty then, except for the hum of vending machines, the distant click of old pipes, and the soft squeak of his shoes against the marble floors. At 52, Marcus Hale had learned how to move through important buildings without being seen. He knew which doors stuck in winter, which judges arrived before sunrise, which clerks left coffee rings on polished desks, and which hallways held conversations people assumed no janitor would understand. He wore a faded charcoal hoodie over his maintenance shirt, dark work pants worn thin at the knees, and black shoes that had been repaired more times than replaced. To most people who passed him during the day, he was simply part of the building's background, like a trash bin, a mop bucket, or a light that flickered near the elevators. But Marcus had not always been invisible. Years earlier, before the courthouse had reduced him to a man with a mop, he had worked in the records division, the quiet room where evidence logs, video files, sealed documents, and time-stamped materials were handled with more care than most people ever imagined. Marcus had not been a lawyer, a judge, or a man with a title people respected in public, but he had been trusted with something more fragile than reputation. He had been trusted with the record, and to Marcus, the record was sacred. He believed a time stamp mattered. He believed a receipt mattered. He believed a camera angle, a signature, a missing minute on a file, or a note written in the margin could become the only thing standing between a person and a lie that looked official. He had seen what happened when powerful people treated paperwork like clay, shaping it until the truth became convenient. He had seen ordinary people lose jobs, children, homes, and names because someone with a cleaner suit and a louder voice wrote the first version of the story. That was why Marcus had lost his position. It had happened 7 years earlier, in a case that almost no one remembered now. A young man had claimed he had been mistreated during a detention incident, and the entire dispute came down to a hallway camera file and the time written in the evidence log. The file showed one thing. The amended report suggested another. A superior had asked Marcus to correct what they called a harmless clerical error. The tone had been casual, almost friendly, as if changing a number by 14 minutes was the same as fixing a typo. Marcus had refused. He had not shouted. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply said that the time on the file was the time on the file, and that his initials would not sit beside a lie. In a place like Bryan County, that kind of refusal did not always create a scandal. Sometimes it created something quieter and more efficient. His performance reviews changed. His attitude was questioned. His ability to work well with others became a concern. Within months, the man trusted to protect records was reassigned to building maintenance, and the courthouse learned to speak of him as difficult without ever explaining what he had been difficult about. Marcus accepted the new job because he needed to eat, because his wife Ruth needed medication, and because pride did not pay rent. But acceptance was not the same as forgetting. Every morning, as he pushed his mop past the locked records office, he remembered the kind of people who smiled while asking honest men to bend the truth. He remembered how quickly a room could turn against someone who refused to be useful to a lie. By 5:30 that morning, the first pale light had begun to press against the courthouse windows. Marcus rinsed the mop, folded the cleaning cloths, and checked the small black notebook he kept in his back pocket. It was not fancy. Its corners were soft from years of use, and its cover had been taped twice. Inside were work hours, grocery costs, medication reminders, appointment dates, and little notes written in a careful hand. Some people used phones for everything. Marcus still trusted paper, especially when paper was kept close. On the top line of that day's page, he had written Ruth's kidney appointment, Naya's birthday, and a short grocery list. Oat milk, bread, soup, apples, Ruth's prescription, blue cupcake. The cupcake mattered more than the price should have allowed. Nitya, Marcus's 12-year-old granddaughter, had asked for nothing big that year. She knew money was tight. She knew her grandmother had been tired. She knew her grandfather counted bills at the kitchen table when he thought no one was watching. So she had asked for one blue cupcake from the bakery case at the grocery store near the bus stop. The one with the bright frosting and tiny white sugar stars. Marcus had promised he would bring it home after work. That was the kind of promise a man like Marcus treated seriously. When he stepped out of the courthouse a little after 6, the town still looked half asleep. The sidewalks were wet from an overnight drizzle, and the streetlights gave the pavement a dull silver shine. Marcus pulled his hoodie tighter around his shoulders and walked toward the bus stop with the slow, careful pace of a man whose knees had carried too much for too long. He was tired, but not unhappy. There was a difference. Tired was the body asking for rest. Unhappy was the soul giving up. Marcus had not given up. At home, Ruth would still be asleep in the recliner because lying flat had become uncomfortable. Nia would be getting ready for school, pretending not to care too much about her birthday because she did not want to make anyone feel guilty. Marcus pictured the cupcake in its little plastic container, imagined placing it on the kitchen table, imagined Nia trying to hide her smile and failing. That small picture carried him through the cold morning better than coffee ever could. The grocery store was already open when he arrived. It was one of those clean, modern stores that tried to make ordinary things look expensive. The floors shone under fluorescent lights. The produce was stacked in bright pyramids. Soft music floated above the aisles, cheerful enough to make the place feel welcoming if a person did not know how quickly welcome could disappear. Marcus took a basket near the entrance and moved through the store with the careful focus of someone who knew exactly what he could spend. He chose the bread first because bread was cheaper near the back shelf. Then soup, apples, and oat milk. At the pharmacy counter, he waited quietly while a young clerk looked through the bins for Ruth's prescription. He did not complain about the wait. Marcus had spent too much of his life watching people unload their impatience onto workers who had no power over the system holding them up. When the prescription came, he checked the price, swallowed the worry it gave him, and added the receipt to his notebook. Near the bakery case, he paused longer than he meant to. The blue cupcake sat in the front row, exactly where Nia had described it, bright and almost ridiculous beneath the cold glass. For a second, Marcus felt the weight of the morning lift. It was a small thing, but small things were often where love survived when money could not do much else. He asked for one, watched it placed carefully into a little container, and paid for it separately, so it would not get crushed under the groceries. The cashier who helped him was young, with kind eyes, and the nervous energy of someone still learning how to stand up in a workplace that rewarded silence. Her name tag was there, but Marcus did not need to read it to understand her. He recognized that look, the look of a person who saw more than she said. She noticed his notebook when he tucked the receipt between the pages. She noticed that he thanked her like her work mattered. She noticed that he did not rush her, did not talk down to her, and did not treat the small transaction as beneath him. Later, that would matter. At the time, it was just another quiet kindness in a morning full of ordinary things. But from the customer service counter, Victor Rowe was watching. Victor was the assistant manager, the kind of man who had learned to make authority out of a vest and a clipped tone. He was not the owner. He was not even the store manager. But he had enough control over schedules, complaints, and shift reports to make younger employees fear him and tired customers avoid him. He liked that. It gave shape to a life that had not become as impressive as he once imagined it would. Victor had been under pressure for weeks. Inventory numbers were wrong. Premium items had gone missing. Corporate had started asking questions in careful emails that sounded polite only to people who had never been blamed for anything. Victor knew exactly why the numbers were wrong. He knew which products had been moved, which small thefts he had hidden, and which adjustments he had made to keep suspicion pointed away from himself. But pressure has a way of making dishonest people creative. He needed a story. Not a perfect story, because perfect stories invite inspection. He needed a believable one. A tired older man in worn clothes, a small basket, a separate bakery purchase, A store full of distracted shoppers. A private security lead who already believed the worst about certain people before facts arrived. To Victor, Marcus was not a customer. He was an opportunity. Marcus had no idea he had been chosen. He paid at the self-checkout for the groceries, moving slowly but carefully, scanning each item and placing it into the bagging area. The machine gave him trouble once with the apples, and he waited for assistance without irritation. The young cashier glanced over, helped clear the warning, and watched him finish the transaction. Marcus folded the receipt and placed it into his notebook with the pharmacy receipt and the bakery receipt. Then he set the cupcake on top of the bag, like something fragile enough to deserve its own space. As he turned toward the exit, Victor stepped away from the counter. The moment was almost invisible at first. A manager intercepting a customer near the front of the store was not unusual. A security lead drifting closer from the side aisle was not enough to make most people stop. Shoppers kept moving. Carts rolled. The automatic doors opened and closed with soft mechanical sighs. Everything about the scene looked normal from a distance, and that was what made it dangerous. Victor spoke with the practiced calm of a man performing concern for an audience. He suggested there had been a problem. He implied that Marcus needed to wait. He did not accuse him loudly at first. He was too careful for that. He wanted the attention to gather slowly, wanted people to see Marcus held in place before they heard why. Because once a person looks detained, the crowd begins inventing reasons. Marcus felt the change immediately. It was not fear first. It was recognition. The temperature of the room seemed to shift, not in the air, but in the way people looked at him. A woman near the cereal aisle slowed down. A man with a cart full of bottled water glanced once and then looked away. Someone whispered without knowing anything. The private security lead approached with his jaw set and his mind already made up. His name was Brent Calder, though Marcus did not know it yet. Calder had the posture of a man who believed firmness was the same as truth. He wore a plain dark security uniform, but he carried himself as if the store had given him a kingdom. He did not ask Marcus what happened. He asked Victor what the problem was, and that told Marcus everything about the direction the morning had taken. Victor produced a bag Marcus had never touched. It contained expensive items from a premium shelf, the kind of goods Marcus would not have bought even in a better month. The bag appeared from behind the counter, as if it had been waiting for its cue. Victor said enough for people nearby to understand that he believed Marcus had tried to leave without paying. He kept his voice measured, but there was satisfaction underneath it. He was not discovering a crime. He was presenting one. Marcus reached for his notebook. That small movement made Calder stiffen. The security lead told him not to reach around, not to make things harder, not to act like he could talk his way out of what they had already found. Marcus stopped, not because Calder was right, but because Marcus understood how quickly a normal gesture could be rewritten by someone determined to see danger. He kept his hands visible and explained, as calmly as he could, that he had receipts for everything he bought. But calm did not help him. Calm often angers people who depend on panic to prove their version of events. Calder wanted Marcus defensive. Victor wanted him confused. The crowd wanted him simple enough to categorize quickly. But Marcus stayed measured, and that quiet steadiness made the accusation feel less secure. So Victor added details. He mentioned the high-value items. He spoke of prior losses. He hinted that the store had been watching people like Marcus for weeks, though Marcus had never been part of any such thing. The young cashier heard that and looked up. She remembered the self-checkout. She remembered helping with the apples. She remembered the folded receipt. Her face changed with the first sharp edge of understanding, but fear held her in place. Victor controlled schedules. Victor wrote evaluations. Victor knew how to punish people without making it look like punishment. She was 19, new and not yet sure courage would protect her from consequences. Marcus saw her hesitation and did not blame her. That was one of the things people misunderstood about the quiet. They assumed silence meant weakness or approval. But Marcus knew silence had many shapes. Some silence was cowardice. Some was survival. Some was the terrible pause before a person decided what kind of witness they were willing to become. Calder stepped closer. Victor stood behind him. The store kept moving around them, but differently now. Shoppers did not stop in a circle like people in movies. Real life was colder than that. They slowed, stared, judged, and kept shopping. A mother pulled her child gently toward another aisle. An older man pretended to compare prices on canned beans while listening to every word. A teenager lifted his phone, then lowered it when Calder looked his way. The humiliation did not need a crowd gathered tightly around it. It only needed enough people to see and choose comfort over truth. Marcus asked them to check the cameras. That should have been the simplest request in the world. In a store with cameras above registers, doors, aisles, and counters, a customer asking for footage should have sounded reasonable. But lies do not like neutral witnesses. Victor's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Calder dismissed the request as if it were a trick. He said the matter was already clear enough, and Victor nodded too quickly. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed the nod. He noticed the security lead standing between him and the exit. He noticed Victor's eyes cutting once toward the freezer aisle and then away. He noticed the young cashier pressing her lips together, as if the truth were physically hurting her. Most of all, he noticed the small red light above the freezer case. It was not one of the obvious store cameras mounted in black domes from the ceiling. It was smaller, placed near a service panel, the kind installed by an outside maintenance company to monitor temperature access and after-hours service. Marcus had seen hundreds of cameras in his old job. He knew the difference between a camera controlled by a building and one maintained by a vendor. He knew that sometimes the most important witness was the one powerful people forgot existed. For the first time that morning, Victor had chosen the wrong man. Not because Marcus was rich, he was not. Not because Marcus had influence, he had very little. Not because anyone in that store was ready to protect him. Most were not. Victor had chosen the wrong man because Marcus understood records the way other people understood weather. He could feel when a story was being built against him. He knew where to look for the thing that would survive after voices finished lying. Still, knowledge did not save him from shame. Calder's voice grew harder. Victor's expression became more wounded and official, as if he were the victim of Marcus's refusal to accept guilt. The cupcake slipped from the top of the grocery bag during the confusion and landed near the wheel of a shopping cart. No one meant to crush it, or maybe no one cared enough to stop it from being crushed. The little blue frosting smeared across the clear plastic lid, and for one painful second, Marcus thought not of the accusation, not of the security guard, not of the watching shoppers, but of Nia. He had promised her. That was the detail that almost broke him. Not the embarrassment, not the way people looked at him, not even the false accusation. Marcus had survived worse things than public judgment. But the cupcake on the floor, bright blue and ruined under fluorescent light, carried a cruelty no report would ever capture. It was proof that lies do not only attack the accused, they reach outward. They touch birthdays, kitchens, sick wives, children waiting at home, and every small hope a tired person has carried through the morning. Marcus lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but to steady himself. He had learned long ago that anger, when displayed by the wrong person in the wrong room, becomes evidence for the other side. So he swallowed it. He let his breathing slow. He kept his face as calm as he could, while the people around him mistook restraint for guilt. Inside, however, he was already preserving the morning, the time, the aisle, the position of the cupcake, the order of the receipts, the camera above the freezer, the cashier's face, Victor's glance, Calder's words. A record could begin in the mind before it reached paper. By the time Marcus was finally led away from the front of the store and into the small back office, the public part of the humiliation had already done its damage. People would remember him as the man stopped near the exit. Some would tell themselves they had seen stolen goods, though they had only seen a bag Victor produced. Others would remember the security guard's confidence and mistake it for proof. A few would feel uneasy later, maybe while unloading groceries at home. But uneasiness was not the same as testimony. In the back office, Victor's performance changed. Without the shoppers nearby, his concern became impatience. Calder began writing an internal incident note before Marcus had finished explaining. That detail mattered. A fair record listens before it writes. A false one arrives with blank spaces already shaped like conclusions. Marcus asked again for the cameras to be checked. He asked for the self-checkout record, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy receipt, and the freezer camera near the service panel. Each request made Victor more uncomfortable. Calder, however, treated the details as noise. To him, certainty was easier than accuracy. He had already decided which man in the room deserved belief. Marcus was eventually released from the office, but not cleared. That was another kind of cruelty. They did not need to hold him forever to damage him. They only needed to let him leave under a cloud, with his groceries disturbed, his cupcake ruined, and his name attached to an accusation that could follow him in ways no apology could fully undo. Victor kept the premium item bag. Calder kept copies of what he claimed mattered. The receipts Marcus had placed in his notebook were no longer where they had been. That was when the morning became more than humiliation. Marcus noticed the missing receipts before he reached the bus stop. He stood under the gray morning sky with the grocery bag hanging from one hand and the ruined cupcake container in the other. His fingers moved through the notebook once, then again, slowly. The pharmacy slip was still there, tucked between 2 pages. The small list was still there, but the grocery receipt and bakery receipt were gone. For a moment, he simply stood still. A younger man might have rushed back into the store. An angrier man might have shouted. A more naive man might have assumed it was a mistake. Marcus did none of those things. He looked back at the bright entrance, at the shoppers moving in and out as if nothing important had happened there. And he understood that the story had not ended when they let him walk away. It had just become harder to prove. He took out his pen and wrote down the time. That was the first thing Marcus did. Standing beneath the bus stop shelter with the ruined cupcake in one hand and the grocery bag in the other. He wrote the hour, the weather, the number of the checkout lane, the color of the manager's vest, the position of the freezer camera, and the exact moment he realized the receipts were missing. He did not write with trembling anger. He wrote with the careful discipline of a man who had learned that memory becomes stronger when it is anchored to details. The bus came 10 minutes later. Marcus sat near the back, holding the grocery bag close to his knees. People boarded around him with their phones, lunch bags, tired faces, and ordinary morning thoughts. No one knew that the man in the faded hoodie had just been publicly accused, humiliated, and quietly robbed of the very proof that could clear him. That was another cruelty of injustice. The world did not stop for it. Traffic moved. Coffee was poured. School doors opened. People complained about weather and schedules, while someone else's life had already been pushed off balance. Marcus kept looking at the cupcake. The plastic container had cracked on one corner. The blue frosting had smeared against the lid, and the little white sugar stars were pressed into a shapeless mess. It was still technically a cupcake, but it no longer looked like something a grandfather could place proudly in front of a birthday girl. It looked like evidence of carelessness, as if he had failed at the one small thing Nia had asked from him. That thought hurt more than the accusation. When Marcus reached the apartment, the sun had risen enough to make the windows look pale. Ruth was awake in the recliner, wrapped in the old brown blanket she insisted was still good, even though the edges had begun to fray. Illness had made her movement slower, but it had not taken the sharpness from her eyes. She knew Marcus's face before he said anything. Wives who have survived hard years learn to read silence the way others read headlines. Nia was at the kitchen table with her backpack open and one shoe untied, pretending to study a worksheet while secretly watching the door. She was trying to act older than 12. Children in houses with medical bills often learn that trick early. They learn to make their hopes smaller, to ask for less, to smile quickly when adults look tired. But when she saw the damaged cupcake container in Marcus's hand, the pretending fell away. Marcus placed the groceries on the table gently. He apologized without making excuses. He told Nia that something had happened at the store, that the cupcake had been damaged, and that he would make it right. He did not tell the whole story immediately. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he could not bear to place the ugliness of that morning directly into her birthday, before she had even gone to school. But Nia saw more than he wanted her to see. She saw the way his fingers moved carefully, as if his wrist was sore. She saw the tightness around his mouth. She saw Ruth sit up straighter, suddenly alert. And she saw the black notebook on the table, open to a page filled with notes that did not look like a grocery list anymore. Ruth asked what they had done to him. Marcus could have softened it. He could have blamed confusion, policy, a misunderstanding, anything that made the world feel less intentional. But marriage had never survived between them on comfortable lies. So he told her enough. He told her that the assistant manager had accused him of taking items he never touched. He told her the security lead refused to check the receipts properly. He told her the crowd watched, and the young cashier looked as if she wanted to speak, but was afraid. He told her that the receipts were missing now, and that a service camera above the freezer might have seen what mattered. The room became very quiet. Ruth closed her eyes, not because she was surprised, but because some pain returns wearing new clothes. She had watched Marcus lose his records job years earlier for refusing to change a timestamp. She had watched people who barely knew him call him difficult, proud, stubborn, impossible. She had watched him take maintenance work with a straight back and a broken heart, because their family needed him more than his pride did. Now, years later, the same pattern had found him in a grocery store. A person with power had written a story, and Marcus had been placed inside it without permission. Nia did not cry right away. She stared at the ruined cupcake, then at her grandfather's notebook, then at his face. In that moment, something shifted in her. Childhood did not end all at once, but sometimes it lost a layer in a single morning. She began to understand that unfairness was not always loud enough for strangers to recognize. Sometimes it happened under fluorescent lights, while people kept shopping. Sometimes it wore a polite vest. Sometimes it spoke in a calm voice and counted on everyone else being too busy to care. Marcus wanted her to go to school. Nia wanted to stay home. Ruth settled the matter in the way she often did, with tenderness wrapped around steel. She told Nia that going to school did not mean forgetting, and staying home would not undo what had happened. Then she told Marcus to sit down and eat something before he started trying to carry the whole burden alone. That was Ruth. Even sick, she could still place order around pain. After Nia left, Marcus and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with the notebook between them. Marcus reconstructed everything from the moment he entered the store. Ruth wrote on a separate sheet while he spoke. She asked practical questions, the kind that forced memory to sharpen. Which register had he used? Which cashier helped with the apples? Was the bakery receipt printed separately? Where exactly had Victor stood? Which side of the freezer aisle held the small service camera? Did the security lead touch the groceries before or after the accusation became public? Did anyone else handle the notebook? Marcus answered carefully. He knew the danger of certainty when memory was still fresh and wounded. He did not exaggerate. He did not fill gaps with guesses. He marked what he knew, what he believed, and what needed proof. That distinction mattered. Lies often win by pretending confidence is the same as truth. Marcus had spent his life refusing that mistake. By mid-morning, Ruth had made one decision. They needed Grace Whitmore. Grace was not family by blood, but she had known Marcus long enough to understand what had happened to him the first time the courthouse turned on him. She was a civil rights attorney, with silver in her hair, patience in her voice, and a reputation for making institutions regret underestimating quiet people. Grace did not chase every rumor, and she did not make promises she could not keep. But when she believed a record had been manipulated, she moved quickly, because she knew evidence had a shelf life when guilty people controlled the shelves. Marcus did not want to call her at first. That was not pride exactly. It was exhaustion. He had been through the machinery before. He knew what it meant to become a case. He knew how people would examine his clothes, his job, his tone, his past, his finances, his family, and his anger. He knew they would ask why he did not act differently, why he did not speak louder, why he did not stay calmer, why he did not produce proof before the proof disappeared. Victims are often put on trial long before anyone admits a wrong has been done. But Ruth reminded him that silence had already cost him once. She did not say it cruelly. She said it as someone who had carried the same wound. The first time Marcus lost his position, they had tried to survive quietly. They had hoped that being honorable would be enough. It had not restored his title. It had not corrected the whispers. It had not taught the people who punished him to fear the truth. This time, Ruth said, they would not hand the lie a quiet room to grow in. So Marcus called Grace. He gave the facts simply. He did not dramatize the humiliation. He did not begin with outrage. He began with the missing receipts and the service camera. That told Grace everything she needed to know about the man on the other end of the phone. Many people call lawyers with feelings first. Marcus called with a chain of custody forming in his mind. Grace listened without interrupting. Then she asked for times names, descriptions, and any proof still in his possession. When Marcus mentioned the freezer service camera, there was a pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. Grace knew the value of a camera controlled outside the place where the lie had begun. She told Marcus not to contact the store again on his own, not to post anything, not to threaten anyone, and not to let anger give them a distraction. The first move, she said, had to be preservation. Within the hour, Grace's office sent formal preservation notices to the grocery store, the outside refrigeration company, the security contractor, and the pharmacy system connected to the purchase records. The letters demanded that all footage, transaction logs, incident notes, internal communications, and registered data from that morning be retained. They were not loud letters. They did not need to be. They carried the quiet force of someone who knew exactly where evidence liked to disappear. That was the first turn in the story. At the grocery store, Victor received the notice before lunch. He read it once in the small back office. Then he read it again, slower. His face changed, not because the letter accused him directly, but because it named things he had hoped no one would think to name. The freezer camera, the external maintenance vendor, the transaction logs, the incident note, the preserved receipts, the time window. Victor had expected Marcus to complain, maybe to call the store manager, maybe even to shout into a phone and be dismissed as emotional. He had not expected preservation language. He had not expected a lawyer to move before the end of the workday. Most of all, he had not expected the camera above the freezer case to become important. That little camera had always annoyed him. It belonged to the refrigeration maintenance company, not the store's main security system. It existed because expensive freezer failures could ruin inventory overnight, and corporate did not like losing money to broken equipment. It recorded service access, temperature checks, and movement around the freezer doors. Victor had ignored it because it was not part of the camera system he usually reviewed. It was just another small device with a blinking red light, too ordinary to fear. Now he feared it. Calder did too, though he showed it differently. The private security lead did not panic. Men like Calder rarely panic in a way others can see. Instead, he became more certain, more rigid, more offended that anyone would question his handling of the incident. He told himself the matter would hold because Victor had made the initial complaint and Marcus had looked suspicious. He repeated that phrase in his head until it felt almost like evidence. Look suspicious. It was one of the most dangerous phrases in the world because it often revealed more about the person looking than the person being judged. By the end of that day, the store manager had been informed. Corporate had been informed. The outside maintenance vendor had been contacted. The incident had moved from a small back office into email threads, where careful people began choosing careful words. No one wanted to admit fault. No one wanted to accuse Victor too quickly. No one wanted to believe that a private security lead had helped bury receipts, or that an assistant manager had created a false accusation to distract from missing inventory. Institutions rarely begin by searching for truth. They begin by searching for exposure. At home, Marcus waited. Waiting was harder than writing the time, harder than calling Grace, harder even than walking out of the store with strangers' judgment still clinging to his back. Waiting gave the mind too much room. He imagined the footage being deleted. He imagined the vendor saying the camera had not recorded. He imagined Victor explaining everything away, Calder doubling down, the cashier staying silent, and the story becoming another fog of maybe and maybe not. Ruth watched him pace the small living room until his knees started bothering him. Then she told him to sit. He did, not because pacing was useless, but because Ruth had always been better at making commands sound like care. Nia came home from school quieter than usual. She had told no one about the cupcake. She had not eaten the lunch Ruth packed. She had spent the day thinking about the way her grandfather wrote things down, about the receipts missing from the notebook, about the cashier who had seen the truth and said nothing in time. Children often understand injustice in simpler language than adults. To Nia, the question was not complicated. Her grandfather had paid. Someone lied. People watched. The proof had to be found. That evening, she sat beside Marcus with the damaged cupcake container between them. He had tried to buy another one from a different bakery on the way home, but the store had only plain vanilla left, and something in him refused to pretend replacement was the same as repair. Nia surprised him by touching the cracked container gently and saying it still counted because he had tried. Marcus looked away then, because grace from a child can break a man more completely than cruelty from an adult. He promised her again that he would make it right. But even as he said it, he knew making it right would not mean only replacing a cupcake. It would mean pulling a lie into the light. It would mean forcing people who had looked away to look again. It would mean entering the machinery he had spent years avoiding, and trusting that this time, the record might be stronger than the people trying to bend it. The next morning, Grace called. Her voice was controlled, but Marcus heard the energy beneath it. The maintenance company had confirmed the freezer camera existed. It had recorded continuously that morning. Better yet, the footage was stored through the vendor's cloud system, not the grocery store's local office. The store could request access, but it could not quietly erase the original. The files were being preserved. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Grace warned him that preserved did not mean won. Footage had to be reviewed. Angles could disappoint. People could claim context. Lawyers could make simple truths look complicated if they had enough time and money. But she also told him the camera covered part of the aisle near the freezer and part of the path behind the customer service counter. That was enough to matter. Maybe enough to change everything. 2 days later, Grace asked Marcus to come to her office. Ruth insisted on going with him. Nia insisted too, but Marcus hesitated. He wanted to protect her from seeing the worst parts again. Ruth gently reminded him that Nia had already seen the ruined cupcake, the trembling hands, and the silence after. Protecting children did not always mean hiding truth from them. Sometimes it meant letting them see truth handled properly. Grace's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. It smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and raincoats drying near the door. Nothing about it was flashy. The chairs did not match. The shelves were crowded. The walls held framed certificates, community awards, and photographs of people who looked as if they had once arrived there with their names damaged and left with them restored. Grace greeted Marcus with both warmth and focus. She did not pity him. Marcus appreciated that. Pity can make a person feel small, even when it is kindly meant. Grace treated him like a witness to his own life, a man whose memory mattered. She placed a folder on the table, then turned her laptop so the family could see the screen. The first clip was from the self-checkout. It showed Marcus scanning the bread, soup, apples, and oat milk. It showed the young cashier assisting him when the machine paused. It showed Marcus finishing the purchase and placing the receipt into his notebook. The angle was distant, but clear enough. Grace did not speak over it. She let the truth occupy the room without decoration. Ruth's hand found Marcus's under the table. The second clip showed the bakery counter. Marcus paid separately. The cupcake was placed in its container. The receipt was printed. Marcus tucked it away. Nia watched that part with her lips pressed tight, as if she were trying not to feel too much in front of adults. The cupcake, before it was ruined, looked bright and small and innocent. Then came the freezer camera. The footage was not beautiful. It was high, slightly wide, and colder in color than the store's main cameras. But it saw what mattered. It saw Victor near the premium shelf before Marcus ever entered that aisle. It saw him handling the bag of expensive items. It saw him place the bag behind the customer service counter, out of the normal customer path. It saw Marcus pass by later without touching those items at all. Grace paused the video there. No one said anything. Then she let it continue. The camera did not show every angle of the confrontation, but it showed enough. Victor brought the bag forward after Marcus had paid. Calder stepped in. Marcus reached toward his notebook, then stopped. The crowd shifted around them. The young cashier looked over from the self-checkout station. The cupcake fell. A shopping cart wheel caught the edge of the container and crushed it as the shopper moved past, unaware or unwilling to stop. Nia made a small sound then. Marcus reached for her hand, but his eyes stayed on the screen. The final clip showed the back hallway. It was not from the freezer camera, but from another angle Grace had obtained through the preservation demand. It showed Calder alone after the incident, holding folded slips of paper. It showed him place them into his pocket instead of attaching them to the incident materials. It did not capture his thoughts. It did not need to. Some actions are plain enough when placed beside the truth they were meant to hide. Grace closed the laptop. The office felt different after that. Not triumphant. Not yet. Truth, when finally seen, does not always bring immediate joy. Sometimes it brings grief first, because it proves the pain was real, the suspicion was manufactured, and the humiliation did not have to happen. Ruth was the first to speak, but her words were less a question than a verdict. They had known it. Now the record knew it too. Marcus sat very still. For years, people had told him in different ways that records were cold things, that paperwork had no soul, that video could not understand dignity, that timestamps were technical details. But in Grace's office, watching the lie unravel frame by frame, Marcus felt again why he had once sacrificed his position over 14 minutes. The record could not love him. It could not comfort Nia. It could not undo Ruth's worry or restore the cupcake. But it could refuse to forget. And sometimes refusing to forget is where justice begins. Grace explained the next steps. They would not simply release the most shocking clip and hope public anger did the rest. That was how stories became noise. They would build the timeline first. The self-checkout receipt, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy record, the freezer camera, the back hallway footage, the missing slips, the internal note written before Marcus's explanation was complete, the cashier's statement, if she could find the courage to give one, the prior inventory discrepancies connected to Victor. Marcus listened carefully. He was relieved, but he was not naive. He knew the other side would respond. Victor would claim confusion. Calder would claim procedure. Corporate would claim concern. Someone would say the footage lacked context, even though the whole lie had depended on denying context in the first place. Someone would say Marcus should have been more cooperative. Someone would say the security lead was only doing his job. Someone would say mistakes happen. Grace knew all of that too. That was why she looked at Marcus and told him they would not let the case become a debate about his attitude. They would make it about the record, not feelings first, not outrage first. The record first. Because once the record was clear, the feelings would know where to stand. Before they left the office, Nia asked if the video meant everyone would believe him now. It was the kind of question only a child could ask with such painful innocence. Grace did not lie to her. She said some people believe truth when they see it. Some people resist it because it costs them something. And some people only believe it when everyone else does. That was why truth needed witnesses, documents, pressure, and courage all at once. Nia nodded as if she understood more than anyone wanted her to. On the way home, Marcus looked out the bus window at the grocery store when they passed it. Through the glass, he could see shoppers moving under bright lights, pushing carts, comparing prices, choosing cereal, buying flowers, living inside the comfort of ordinary errands. The building looked the same. That bothered him for reasons he could not fully explain. A place where a lie had been built should have looked different afterward. It should have carried a mark. But buildings rarely confess. People have to make them. That night, Grace began preparing the release. Not a reckless post. Not an emotional accusation thrown into the internet. A structured statement with timestamps, preserved footage, transaction confirmation, and a clear demand for accountability. She contacted the store's corporate office again, this time with enough attached proof to make denial dangerous. She contacted the security contractor. She prepared to contact local media if they chose silence over action. Victor did not sleep much that night. Neither did Calder. But Marcus did, for the first time since the morning in the store. Not deeply, not without waking once to check the notebook on the bedside table, but enough to let his body rest. He had spent years believing the truth mattered even when nobody thanked him for protecting it. Now, at last, the truth had begun protecting him back. By sunrise, the story was no longer just his memory. It was a timeline. It was footage. It was receipts. It was a young cashier deciding whether fear would own her voice. It was a granddaughter, learning that dignity sometimes needed documents beside it. And it was a quiet man in a faded hoodie, standing at the edge of a fight he never wanted, realizing that the people who tried to erase him had left their own fingerprints all over the lie. Grace did not release the evidence that afternoon. She knew better than to throw truth into the world before giving it a spine. A raw clip could be twisted. A single angle could be questioned. A few seconds could become entertainment, argument, or noise. What Marcus needed was not noise. He needed a record so complete that every excuse would have to walk past its own reflection before reaching the public. So, Grace built the timeline carefully. She placed Marcus's notebook beside the self-checkout log. She placed the bakery receipt beside the footage of the cupcake purchase. She placed the pharmacy time beside the bus schedule. She placed Victor's movement near the premium shelf beside the moment the planted bag appeared at the counter. She placed Calder's internal incident note beside the video, showing that the note had been written before Marcus's explanation had been properly recorded. Then she placed the missing receipts beside the back hallway footage, where folded slips of paper moved into the wrong hands and out of the official story. By the time she finished, the lie no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked designed. Marcus sat across from her while she reviewed it all. his hands folded around the black notebook he had carried for years. Ruth sat beside him, quiet but steady. Naya sat closer than usual, not because she was afraid of the office, but because she wanted her grandfather to feel that he wasn't standing alone anymore. On the screen, the grocery store looked ordinary. Bright lights, clean floors, carts, a bakery case, people moving through their errands. And inside all that ordinary brightness, a lie had been placed like a trap. That was what made the footage so disturbing. No one had needed darkness. No one had needed an alley, a locked room, or a dramatic threat. The harm had happened in public, under lights, beside shelves of cereal and bread, while ordinary shoppers decided the scene was none of their business. Grace understood that this was the part people would recognize. Not everyone had been falsely accused in a grocery store, but many people knew what it felt like to be judged before being heard. Many knew what it meant for a confident person with a title to be believed faster than a quiet person with proof. Before releasing anything, Grace gave the store one final chance. Her letter was direct. She told corporate that the footage, transaction records, witness information, and preserved notes confirmed Marcus had paid for his items, had not touched the premium goods, and had been falsely accused in a way that caused public humiliation and emotional harm. She demanded a public correction, an apology naming the wrong, immediate action against Victor, full disclosure from the security contractor, protection for the cashier, and compensation that recognized not only the ruined groceries, but the damage to Marcus's dignity. The response came the next morning. It was polished, careful, and empty. Corporate expressed concern. They said they were reviewing the matter. They asked for patience. They claimed they wanted to avoid rushing to judgment, even though their employees had rushed to judgment when Marcus was the one on the floor. They did not name Victor's conduct. They did not admit the receipts had been removed. They did not apologize to Marcus directly. Most of all, they asked Grace not to release anything publicly while their internal review continued. Grace read the email once, then set it down. Marcus did not need her to explain. He had heard that language before. It was the language of institutions buying time, hoping fatigue would do what denial could not. It was the same kind of smooth language that had followed him out of the records division 7 years earlier, when refusing to change a timestamp had somehow become a question about attitude and teamwork. The words were different, but the shape was familiar. This time Marcus did not bend. He gave Grace permission to release the evidence. The statement went out that evening. It was not emotional in the way people expected. It did not beg for sympathy. It did not decorate pain. It laid out the morning with timestamps, receipts, preserved footage, and a clear explanation of what the video showed. It said Marcus had been falsely accused after paying for his groceries. It said a store manager had introduced items Marcus never handled. It said a private security lead had ignored available proof. It said receipts later disappeared from Marcus's notebook. It said the freezer service camera, forgotten by the people who built the lie, had preserved the truth. For the first hour, only a few people noticed. A local reporter shared it, then a community organizer, then a courthouse employee who remembered Marcus from the records division and wrote that he had once been punished for protecting evidence too carefully. That one sentence changed the temperature of the story. People began looking more closely. They watched the clip of Victor placing the bag. They watched Marcus paying at the self-checkout. They watched the cupcake fall and be crushed while people continued shopping. They watched the young cashier's face as she realized what was happening. And then they watched Marcus, calm, humiliated, and observant, noticing the camera no one else remembered. By midnight, the store's silence had become louder than any statement it could have issued. The next morning, news vans arrived outside the grocery store. Corporate closed the entrance for an hour and called it a security concern. Employees were told not to speak to reporters. Victor did not come to work. Calder's contractor announced that he had been placed on leave pending review. The store manager released a short message about taking the allegations seriously, but by then, the public had seen enough polished language to recognize fear wearing a suit. The cashier came forward that afternoon. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She was 19, still new enough to believe that doing a job well might protect her, and old enough to realize that workplaces often protect power before truth. She contacted Grace first because she was terrified of losing her job. Grace took her statement privately and made sure she understood what could happen. Lena said Marcus paid. She said she helped clear the self-checkout warning. She said she saw him place the receipt into his notebook. She said Victor had been unusually focused on Marcus before the accusation. She said she wanted to speak earlier, but fear had locked her throat. Marcus did not condemn her for that fear. He knew how fear worked when the person above you controlled your schedule, your hours, and your ability to pay rent. He also knew that courage delayed was not the same as courage denied. Lena had come forward before the lie could fully settle. That mattered. Her statement pushed the story further. Other employees began to talk. One remembered Victor moving premium items near the stockroom on previous shifts. Another remembered inventory reports that never seemed to match what workers saw. A third said Victor had warned employees not to question management decisions in front of customers. Piece by piece, the image of a concerned assistant manager collapsed. What appeared in its place was a man protecting himself by creating suspicion around someone else. Corporate suspended Victor officially by the end of the week. The word suspended did not satisfy Nia. She wanted stronger words. She wanted fired, exposed, punished, named. Marcus understood her anger, but he had learned that justice often moved slower than the wound. It did not mean it was not moving. Grace reminded the family that the first fall of a powerful person is rarely the final consequence. It is only the moment when distance begins. People who were once protected by institutions suddenly become liabilities to them. That was happening to Victor now. Calder tried to defend himself. Through the security contractor, he claimed he had acted based on the information provided by store management. He claimed Marcus had been uncooperative. He claimed the scene was tense. He claimed his decisions were reasonable under the circumstances. But the footage weakened every sentence. It showed Marcus calm. It showed the receipts. It showed Calder ignoring requests to verify the purchases. It showed him writing the internal note in a way that placed conclusion before investigation. The more Calder explained, the worse he looked. Grace filed the lawsuit before the public conversation could fade. The complaint named the grocery store, Victor, the private security contractor, and Calder. It described false accusation, negligent supervision, intentional emotional harm, mishandling of proof, and a pattern of conduct that allowed a low-status customer to be treated as guilty because it was convenient. But the most powerful part of the complaint wasn't legal language. It was the story of a man who had spent years protecting records from manipulation, only to be nearly destroyed by people who assumed no one would check the record. That part traveled Church leaders repeated it. Local teachers discussed it with older students. Workers at the courthouse whispered about it in elevators. People who had once ignored Marcus while he mopped their hallway began remembering that he had been more than a maintenance worker. Some remembered him from the records division. Some remembered his quiet refusal to alter a time entry years earlier. A few remembered how quickly he had disappeared from that department afterward. Then came the envelope. It arrived at Grace's office with no return address. Inside were copies of old courthouse documents, performance reviews from before Marcus's refusal, all positive. Notes from after his refusal, suddenly critical. Internal emails discussing his lack of flexibility, a memo suggesting reassignment, and a copy of the disputed time entry request that had cost him his position without ever being called punishment. Grace studied the papers for a long time. They did not directly say the courthouse had retaliated. Documents created by careful people rarely confess so openly. But the pattern was there. Before Marcus refused to alter the record, he was reliable, precise, trusted, and professional. After he refused, he became difficult, resistant, and not a good fit. The words had been chosen to hide the truth, but the dates placed them under a light they could not escape. When Marcus saw the documents, he did not smile. Vindication is not always joyful. Sometimes, it feels like standing in front of an old wound and realizing it was exactly as deep as you remembered. For 7 years, Marcus had carried the weight of being quietly demoted, while others called it complicated. Now the paper said what his heart had known. He had not lost his place because he failed the work. He had lost it because he respected the work more than the people above him did. Nia read the documents at the kitchen table. This time, she cried openly. Not because of the grocery store, but because she understood that her grandfather's suffering had a history. The ruined cupcake had been painful. The false accusation had been cruel. But the old records showed something larger. Marcus had been paying for honesty long before she was old enough to understand the cost. The lawsuit changed after that. Grace added the old courthouse documents, not as a separate fight, but as context for who Marcus was and why the grocery store's assumption had been so wrong. He was not a man inventing a story after being embarrassed. He was a man with a documented history of protecting truth, even when truth punished him. The very quality Victor and Calder had mistaken for weakness was the thing that made Marcus dangerous to their lie. Discovery began. That was when the defendants lost control. Email showed Victor had been warned about inventory discrepancies before Marcus entered the store. Schedule notes showed he had been alone near the premium goods before the accusation. Transaction records confirmed Marcus paid. Internal messages showed corporate employees worrying less about Marcus's innocence and more about exposure. Calder's incident note had inconsistencies that grew sharper when placed beside video timestamps. The more documents Grace collected, the more the defense shifted from denial to minimization. They began calling it a mistake. Grace called it a sequence. A mistake is one wrong turn. A sequence is a path. Victor moving the goods, watching Marcus, producing the bag, ignoring the request for camera review, allowing the public accusation, and participating in the removal of receipts was not a single misunderstanding. Calder accepting Victor's version, dismissing Marcus's receipts, documenting guilt before verification, and keeping proof out of the record was not one bad moment. The harm was built step by step, and every step had a person standing on it. Victor broke first. In deposition, He tried to sound offended. He said he was protecting the store. He said inventory pressure had made everyone alert. He said Marcus had seemed suspicious because he moved slowly, kept looking around, and carried a notebook. Grace let him say all of it. Then she placed the video stills in front of him one by one. Victor near the premium shelf. Victor carrying the bag. Victor placing it behind the counter. Victor watching Marcus. Victor producing the bag after Marcus had paid. Victor looking toward the freezer aisle when Marcus asked for cameras. By the end, Victor's confidence had drained out of him. He admitted that he had handled the bag before the accusation. Then he admitted he had not seen Marcus touch those items. Then he admitted he had been under pressure over missing inventory. Each admission came smaller than the last, as if the truth had to be dragged out through his teeth. But it came. Calder lasted longer. He was the kind of man who had built his self-image around certainty, and certainty can become a locked room. He insisted he had acted reasonably. He insisted Marcus's calmness had seemed calculated. He insisted the situation required control. Grace asked him whether control mattered more than accuracy. He avoided the question. She asked whether he had checked the receipts before writing the incident note. He did not answer directly. She asked whether a person in plain clothes was easier for him to doubt than a manager in a vest. That question stayed in the room long after his lawyer objected. The case did not reach a full public trial. That disappointed some people, but Grace told Marcus that justice was not measured only by courtroom drama. After the depositions, after the documents, after the public pressure, and after the security contractor realized Calder had become impossible to defend cleanly, the defendants asked for mediation. Marcus did not want a quiet settlement that buried the truth. Grace made that clear before the first meeting began. No agreement would exist without public correction. That became the line. The final resolution came with money, but money was not the heart of it. The store issued a public statement acknowledging that Marcus had paid for his purchases, had been wrongly accused, and had been treated in a way that violated basic standards of dignity and fairness. Victor was terminated. The company referred his conduct related to inventory manipulation for further review. Calder was dismissed by the security contractor and later lost his license to work in private security after the review board found he had mishandled the incident and failed to preserve customer proof. The store agreed to retrain employees, revise accusation procedures, protect workers who came forward, and require immediate preservation of footage when a customer disputed an accusation. Grace also secured something Marcus had not expected. A correction letter was sent to the courthouse leadership, accompanied by the old documents and the public record of the grocery case. It did not force the county to rewrite history completely, but it forced them to acknowledge that Marcus's prior work and records had been professional, careful, and respected before the disputed reassignment. It also led to a small public recognition from a county oversight committee, praising the importance of evidence integrity and naming Marcus as someone who had upheld that principle. It was not everything, but it was not nothing. The ceremony was small. Marcus almost did not attend. He did not trust ceremonies easily. Too many institutions used plaques to cover the cracks they refused to repair. But Ruth told him that Nia needed to see the room say his name correctly. So he went. He wore his best jacket, the one Ruth had brushed twice that morning. Nia stood beside him with her shoulders straight. Grace stood in the back, watching like a person who had seen many victories and knew none of them arrived clean. When Marcus's name was spoken, he did not feel pride first. he felt the younger version of himself standing somewhere inside him. The man who had refused to change 14 minutes, and then walked out of the records division with his future quietly damaged. He wished that man could have known this moment would come. Not because it would undo the loss, but because it would prove the loss had not been meaningless. Afterward, Nia asked if he felt better. Marcus told her the truth in the gentlest way he could. He felt lighter, but not untouched. There are some things justice repairs, and some things it can only honor. The public apology did not erase the grocery store floor. The settlement did not uncrush the cupcake. Victor's termination did not give back the years Marcus had spent being treated like a man who had fallen because of his own attitude. But the lie had not won. That mattered. The record had held. A week later, Marcus returned to the grocery store. He went alone first. Ruth wanted to come. Nia wanted to come. Grace advised him not to push himself. But Marcus knew there was a difference between avoiding a wound and letting it own the map of your life. He needed to walk through those doors again under his own power. The store looked the same and different. The floors still shone. The lights still hummed. Customers still moved through the aisles with baskets and carts. But near the customer service counter, Victor was gone. Near the entrance, a new sign explained customer verification procedures without naming the case. Employees glanced at Marcus with recognition, some embarrassed, some respectful. Lena saw him from the self-checkout station and froze for half a second before stepping forward. She did not offer a dramatic apology in front of everyone. She did something better. She treated him carefully, normally, respectfully. She asked if he needed help finding anything. Marcus thanked her. That was all. Sometimes restoration is not a speech. Sometimes it is the ordinary courtesy that should have been there from the beginning. He walked to the bakery case. There, behind the glass, was a row of blue cupcakes with white sugar stars. Marcus looked at them for a long time. The worker behind the counter waited without rushing him. Finally, he bought one, then another. Then a small box of 4, because this time he could afford to bring enough home for everyone. He paid, took the receipt, looked at it, and placed it into his notebook. At home, Nia laughed when she saw the box. Not because the old pain was funny, but because joy had returned to a place where humiliation had once tried to settle. Ruth made tea. Grace came by later with documents for Marcus to sign, but stayed for a cupcake because Nia insisted. They did not pretend everything was simple now. Ruth still had appointments. Bills still arrived. Marcus still worked hard. The world had not transformed into fairness overnight, but something inside the family had changed. Nia no longer saw her grandfather as only a tired man who worked before sunrise. She saw him as someone who had protected truth even when truth cost him. Ruth no longer had to carry the old courthouse wound in silence. Grace no longer had to wonder whether the system that punished Marcus would ever be forced to face even a small part of what it had done. And Marcus, though still humble, no longer moved through the world quite as invisibly as before. With part of the settlement, he started a small fund. He named it the Hale Evidence Integrity Fund, though Nia teased him for choosing such a serious name. The fund helped ordinary people preserve records quickly when they were accused by employers, landlords, stores, agencies, or anyone else with more power and better paperwork. It helped pay for copies, letters, legal consultations, and emergency preservation requests. Marcus did not want fame. He wanted fewer people standing alone under fluorescent lights while someone else wrote the first lie. He began speaking at community centers. At first, he hated it. Marcus had never enjoyed being watched. But he understood that his story could teach what his silence could not. He told people to keep receipts, to write times down, to ask for cameras early, to save messages, to notice who controls the record. He told them that documentation was not distrust. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was dignity given a place to stand. Nia came with him when she could. She sat in the back with a notebook of her own, writing things down in a hand that looked more and more like his. Years later, Marcus would remember that more clearly than any news clip. Not the headlines, not the settlement, not Victor's downfall or Calder's dismissal. He would remember his granddaughter learning that truth was not just something a person felt. It was something a person protected. One evening, after a community meeting, Nia asked him whether he ever wished he had shouted that day in the store. Marcus thought about it longer than she expected. Then he told her that part of him did. Part of him wished he had made every shopper stop, every employee listen, every liar feel the force of his pain. But another part of him knew that anger alone would have been used against him. The world often demands perfect calm from the wounded and perfect trust in the powerful. That is not fair. But Marcus had learned how to survive inside that unfairness long enough for the record to speak. Nia did not like that answer. Marcus did not either. But truth is not always satisfying in the places where pain first asks for satisfaction. Sometimes the deeper victory comes later, when the lie has exhausted itself and the quiet details remain standing. Months passed. The grocery store changed in small ways. Employees received training that no one could dismiss as optional. Customer accusations required documented verification before public confrontation. Footage preservation became automatic when disputes were raised. Workers had a protected way to report pressure from management. None of it made the store perfect. No policy can. But policies are doors. And before Marcus, people like him had often been left outside them. Lena kept her job and eventually became a shift lead. She carried the memory of her fear with humility, not as punishment, but as instruction. When new employees joined, she told them that silence could feel safe in the moment and still become a wound later. She never used Marcus's story carelessly, but the lesson shaped the way she treated people. Victor did not return. For a while, he tried to describe himself as a victim of public outrage, but the inventory findings followed him. People who build lies often expect sympathy when the lie collapses on them. Marcus did not celebrate Victor's ruin, but he did not confuse mercy with denial. Victor had chosen a scapegoat. He had chosen Marcus because he thought a tired black man in a faded hoodie would be easy to doubt. The consequence belonged to him. Calder disappeared from private security work. That, too, was justice of a kind. The authority he had used to silence a man was taken from him because he had proven he could not be trusted with it. Marcus did not need to see him suffer. He only needed to know that the next tired customer would not have to face that same cold certainty from the same man. As for Marcus, he kept working, not because he had to accept invisibility again, but because honest work had never been the shame. The shame had always belonged to those who looked at the work and decided the worker mattered less. He still rose before sunrise. He still walked through blue darkness. He still carried the black notebook. But now, when courthouse employees passed him, some greeted him by name. Some looked embarrassed. A few even thanked him. Marcus accepted the thanks without becoming dependent on it. He had learned not to build his dignity on other people finally noticing what should have been obvious. Recognition was welcome, but it was not the source. His worth had existed on the grocery store floor. It had existed when the cupcake was crushed. It had existed when the receipts were missing, when the crowd looked away, when Victor smiled, when Calder wrote, when no apology had yet arrived. That was the lesson he wanted Naya to keep. A person is not made innocent by footage. The footage only proves what was already true. A person is not made worthy by a public apology. The apology only admits what should never have been denied. And dignity does not begin when powerful people recognize it. Dignity is already there, even when the world refuses to bow its head before it. On Naya's next birthday, there were blue cupcakes on the kitchen table again. This time, the frosting was perfect. The little white sugar stars sat untouched. Ruth lit one candle because Nia said 12 had been too many last year, and 13 felt too dramatic. Marcus laughed at that, a quiet laugh that made Ruth smile. For a moment, there were no lawyers, no footage, no statements, no old courthouse documents, no grocery store floor. There was only family, warm light, and a child blowing out a candle in a room where love had survived the attempt to shame it. After Nia made her wish, she asked Marcus if he wanted to know what it was. He told her wishes should be kept private. She said this one could be shared because it was not only for her. She had wished that people would learn to check the truth before they decided who someone was. Marcus looked at Ruth then, and Ruth looked back at him with tears in her eyes, because that was the kind of wish no child should have to make, and every adult should have already honored. Years later, people would still ask Marcus about the freezer camera. They wanted to know how he noticed it. They wanted to know whether he felt lucky. Marcus always answered carefully. Luck had played a role, maybe. But what saved him wasn't luck alone. It was a lifetime of paying attention. It was a notebook in a pocket. It was a wife who refused silence. It was a granddaughter who believed him before the world did. It was a lawyer who moved before evidence could disappear. It was a cashier who found her courage. And it was one small red light blinking above a freezer case, while everyone else assumed the truth had no witness. The world is full of people like Marcus. People who clean buildings before sunrise. People who count coins at pharmacy counters. People who keep receipts because they know how quickly suspicion can find them. People who are treated as background until someone needs a scapegoat. People who have learned to stay calm, not because they feel no anger, but because they know their anger will be used as evidence against them. And the world is also full of people standing nearby with carts and baskets, deciding whether to look away. That is where justice often begins or dies. Not only in courts, not only in statements, not only in viral clips. It begins in the small human moment, when someone sees a person being judged too quickly and decides that comfort is not more important than truth. It begins when a cashier speaks, when a shopper records, when a worker preserves a file, when a family writes down the time, when someone refuses to let the first version of a story become the only version. Marcus Hale did not set out to become a symbol. He set out to buy groceries, medicine, and one blue cupcake for a child he loved. But the people who tried to humiliate him forgot something that powerful people often forget. Quiet people are not empty. Tired people are not careless. Poor people are not proof of guilt. And a man who has spent his life protecting records knows exactly where truth likes to hide. So if you remember anything from Marcus's story, remember this. Never decide what a person is before you know what happened to them. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Never assume dignity disappears just because a crowd refuses to see it. And when the lie is loud, rushed, and confident, look for the small thing still blinking in the corner. Because sometimes justice does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a receipt, a notebook, a witness who finally speaks, and a forgotten camera that refuses to look away.